Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission meeting. In order to help conserve bandwidth, we are asking all commission members to keep their microphone and video on mute the entire meeting unless you are speaking during question and comment periods. If you have a comment during a presentation, please use the hand raising tool. We ask that all members of the public keep their video and microphone turned off for the whole meeting, except when called on during public comment period that will start shortly. If you would like to speak during the public comment period, please use the comment box now and write your comment followed by your first and last name, and I will call on you to speak when it is your turn. You will have 2 minutes to speak when I call your name. Thank you all for your cooperation. Now I'll turn the meeting over to CACC Chair David Fleckenstein.
Thanks, Christina. Next slide, please, Rob. Well, good morning, everyone. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us, to include our commission members, the interested parties that we have on the line, and as well as the members of the public. I also want to thank or want to welcome Lois Vollenbach, who replaced Sabrina Minshall from the Spokane Regional Transportation Council, and Jason Thibodeau, who replaces Josh Brown from the Puget Sound Regional Council. Today's agenda includes a public comment period, a calendar update from Rob Hodgman, comments from our communications team PRR on the survey conducted in the upcoming open house, a presentation from Public Health Seattle and King County and the University of Washington, and of course comments from Steve Edmiston, plus a 12-minute video from the Great Electric aircraft race that aired on PBS all before lunch. We will take a short break between the PRR presentation and the public health study. After the lunch break, we will introduce the WASDOT strategy that's going to address advanced air mobility and sustainable aviation and the ties to the CACC. This will lead to some observations on our focus and an explanation of the upcoming aviation system plan and how the CACC's work is melded into it. Finally, Rita Brogan is going to lead the commission members in a discussion, and we will conclude with next steps. Unless there are any comments or additions to the agenda, I'll take that as approval and we'll move on. I'll pause for just a minute to see if there are any comments. Okay, nothing being heard. Christina will take over with the public comment period. Christina, over to you.
Thank you, David. We continue to receive public comments sent to the CACC email. All comments are compiled and sent to all CACC members on a recurring basis for their review. We will now start the public comment period for this meeting. I'll be working from the chat box submissions you provided. I will state your name and you will have 2 minutes for public comment. If at the end of 2 minutes you go over, I will state your 2 minutes are over and ask that you please wrap up your comment. Please abide by the protocols of the commission meeting to help this meeting run smoothly, and again, thank you for your cooperation. Now we will start with our guest, Ursula Euler.
Good morning. I hope everyone can hear me. I know I have only 2 minutes. I'm not sure if I'm the only member of the public or not, but I'm going to speak anyhow because I would like to ask you what the time is. It seems like a simple question, but my next question then is, where do you think the public is at the moment? I mean, I'm lucky I can make time for a long meeting like this on a weekday during the middle of the day, but most people are at work. So I may be the only person here from the public who comments, but that's exactly what leads to my point. The public involvement has been minimal. It has been where I have to seek out information. It is not provided to me as a push action. I have to pull it. I have to go somewhere, get it. So I find the public involvement in this whole process really lacking. which leads to a lack of diversity on the commission, on comments, and really sort of a discourse and discussion of the real issues really that way can't happen. I have asked questions before of representatives, elected representatives, what even the public involvement was when the law that created this commission was created, and I never got an answer on that. So my point this morning is that I really don't think that the public is involved, doesn't have the information to be involved, doesn't have the opportunity, but it's important to involve the public and diversity at the point of decision making, not afterwards and after recommendations have already been made. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ursula. And I'm looking at the chat box and I don't see anybody else that wants to comment, but I'll wait a few seconds just in case. If you want to comment, please write in the chat box.
So Christina, while we're doing that, I'll address a couple of Ursula's questions. The first question I think, Ursula, you had was on time, and I suspect you're talking about the timeline. Rob Hodgman is going to go over the timeline next.
No, I was saying today is a weekday. People are at work. I was not asking about the agenda. Just need to clarify that.
Well, that gets me to the next point. And PRR, our communications firm, is going to talk about the efforts to reach out to the public and things that we're doing in the future. So I hope that answers some of your questions.
Okay, there may be no other public comments, so thank you all for participating. This concludes the public comment, and now I will turn it over to Rob Hodgman.
Actually, Christina, it goes to me next.
Oh, sorry. So David.
So a little bit about what the staff focus has been. Since our last meeting, the staff focus has entailed finalizing the scope of work for the aviation system plan update and getting the request for proposals out to our interested consultants. We also spent some time answering upfront questions from a few firms regarding the commission's work and how it feeds into the aviation system plan. Of note, today you will hear several of us talk about addressing capacity for air passenger service, air cargo, and general aviation. For anyone new to these meetings, it may appear that these are equally weighted, but in reality, commercial aviation capacity is the priority need that this is addressing. That being said, general aviation needs and capacity issues for general aviation are also being addressed as part of the state's overall aviation system. Next, our communications firm, PRR, who's been working for the CACC, rolled up the data from the survey conducted and worked with the planning staff on the upcoming open house to gain additional input from the public. PRR is going to speak to us to address the upcoming changes in aviation that we will see from the advanced air mobility. WASDOT also put together a short strategy document on steps that we can take to prepare for what's called advanced air mobility and how we can begin to transition to a more sustainable aviation system. I'll talk a little bit more about that after lunch. Finally, I want to thank the planning staff, our speakers, and others in putting together everything that went into today's meeting. Rob, over to you.
Good morning. Hello again. I think everyone on the call is probably familiar with me, but just in case you're not, my name is Rob Hodgman. I'm the Senior Aviation Planner at WashDOT. I'm a non-voting commission member, and I'm the lead planner for all the CACC analysis. So what I want to share with you today is kind of next steps. As you've heard, WashDOT Aviation will accommodate topics of interest to the commission in the upcoming Aviation System Plan study. We wanted to give you an idea of what kind of activity to expect over the next many months. Currently, we are in solicitation for consultant firms. The advertisement was posted earlier this week and will close on September 7th. Our goal is to have the consultant team on board in time for our mid-October CACC meeting. This calendar is a preliminary concept. Once we have selected a consultant team, we will refine this calendar, but for now, there are a few points that should remain fairly consistent. There are far too many system plan tasks to include all of them on the calendar, and many don't have direct input to the CACC deliberations, so they've been left off because the calendar was becoming a little too cluttered. You can see the key in the bottom right corner of the slide. The salmon colored tasks are those tasks that are system plan tasks that are also aligned with the commission's work. The green boxes are templated CACC outreach meetings, CACC outreach to the public. The tan boxes are templated CACC meetings, and the gray boxes are templated reports and recommendations back to the legislature. So you can anticipate that the meetings, the public outreach, and the reports to the legislature will remain constant. As far as the salmon color boxes, we'll just have to see after we work with our consultant team if that changes somewhat. But the goal remains to provide the commission with the detailed technical analysis needed in time for the commission to make informed decisions. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Christina, who will introduce PRR. Christina.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, I would like to introduce PRR, the communications and marketing firm that's been working with the CACC on public engagement. They will be providing information about the first public survey results and an upcoming open house. Is PRR here?
I'm going to call right now, okay?
Sounds good. We may be a little ahead of schedule.
Senator Kaiser, do you have a question or comment?
I do. Our question was, do we have a date for an upcoming open house established?
Yes, and Lindsay Burgess is just joining us, and she's going to address that, Senator.
Okay, thank you.
So Lindsay, welcome, and we got to you a little bit early. You're on.
Great. Hi. Okay. Hi, everyone. I am joining you from Ontario, so if my internet cuts out or anything, please bear with me. Hopefully it will be just fine. So my name is Lindsay Burgess. I'm here from PRR, and we've been working with WSDOT to engage communities around the state and seek input as you all develop recommendations for the legislature. So I'm going to give a quick recap of the survey that we conducted earlier this year and talk about our upcoming online open house. If anyone has questions at any point, feel free to stop me or jump in. So next slide, please. Okay, so the CACC public involvement goals, probably you are all familiar, but we just wanted to start here to kind of frame what sort of engagement we've been doing and why. So both the survey and the online open house were designed to support the overarching CACC public involvement goals of informing and sharing understanding of the importance of proper aviation capacity in the state, risks of not meeting future needs, and the potential environmental impacts of increased capacity. To clearly communicate the needs of the CACC study and recommendations, to inform and involve the community and all its various representative groups on the progress, impacts, and benefits of the CACC's recommendation, and to foster sound project development decisions and to more fully explore the needs of both airport users and adjacent communities. So next slide. So we conducted a random sample survey in the spring of this year. Go to the next slide. There will be more details on survey methods in the survey report that you'll be receiving at some point after this meeting, but I'll just summarize here that we mailed invitations to 33,000 randomly selected addresses in King, Kitsap, Lewis, Mason, Pierce, Skagit, Snohomish, and Thurston counties. And I won't get into all of the sampling methods, but we oversampled for smaller counties or census tracts that are more racially diverse and have lower incomes to achieve a more representative sample. And I will talk more about that kind of as we get into the results. So next slide. So the survey had an 8% response rate. And our expectation for this type of survey in this environment with COVID and all the things in the news was about 7%. So that's in line with what we planned and a pretty typical response rate for this type of survey. We did do some data weighting at the county level. So I mentioned on the last slide that we had oversampled some counties, but we wanted to make sure that we had accurate representation, particularly for the 18 to 24 age group. And we found that that group was underrepresented even after we used an online panel to supplement. So we did a little bit of data weighting there. Next slide. So the full survey questions will be in the report that you will receive. And if you have questions about those at that point, you can always contact me or any of us. But we generally asked questions in 4 categories, starting with the participants' understanding of aviation capacity and demand. And we asked those questions with no context to make sure we were really gauging what people knew or believed before we gave them any information about the issue. And we then asked about the importance of various CACC principles and presented statements that describe the benefits and consequences of meeting or not meeting demand. And then we asked again about their understanding of aviation capacity and demand to gauge how much that understanding changed after some education about the issue. That's a very high level overview, but the full survey will be in the report that you'll get so you can see all of the questions. Next slide, please. So I've pulled out some of the most important themes here, and I will go through each of these in more detail on subsequent slides. So, you don't need to like hurriedly read this and memorize it, but the big takeaway is that most people think we should meet demand, but they also want to minimize environmental impacts. And I see some folks from PSRC on the line here. This sounds familiar, right? It's kind of the same thing I know that PSRC found on the survey that they did last year. So next slide, please. So as I go through these, I will try to explain how to read the graphs, but if anyone has questions, again, please feel free to stop me. So the text here is a little small. On this scale, each county has its own row. The counties are listed alphabetically if you're trying to find one in particular. The orange was not important, ranges to slightly important, and then getting into the medium blue and the dark blue is very important and extremely important. So most respondents said they think having an efficient system of airports is very important or extremely important. And people who said that it was very important or extremely important also tended to be people who have higher incomes and who fly more often. Go to the next slide. So many respondents who said they're not familiar with the capacity problem that we're trying to address many respondents are not familiar with the capacity problem. The respondents who are familiar tend to fly more frequently for personal or business travel. They tend to be older and they tend to be men. Sorry, I'm trying to monitor the chat here. I'm sorry, PSRC is Puget Sound Regional Council, and they did a survey similar to this about a year before we did, and that is available on their website, I believe. But basically the finding was the same, that people thought we should meet demand, but were concerned about the environmental impacts.
Lindsay, can you pause for 1 second for a question
Yes.
from Senator Kaiser?
Yes.
Senator Kaiser?
Thank you. Lindsay, I just wanted to call out, I was struck on both these slides at the large interest out of Pierce County in both this one about how familiar and the one about how important. It stood out that Pierce County was actually had a higher level of extremely familiar and familiar than King County, which I found extraordinary. Just mention.
Yes, no, that's great. And as we go through, there are some more places where we pull things out by county. So if you have questions or anything else you want to note, please feel free. And I'm trying to look at slides and notes and all the things at the same time. So if there's a hand up or a chat that I'm missing, please anybody chime in and pause me. So, okay. And we go to, okay, great. We're on the air cargo slide. So, perfect. Getting my notes synced back up with the slides that we're on. So I pulled out two things here because I thought putting them side by side was interesting, but looking at the importance of economic feasibility and the importance of environmental responsibility, most respondents, between 68 and 74%, depending on county, think it's very or extremely important that the recommendations are economically feasible. And close to the same, 55 to 79%, think it's very or extremely important that the recommendations are environmentally responsible. And there was a significant, and in research, that's like a capital S significant, statistically significant difference in the amount that King County residents in particular valued that economic environmental responsibility component. And not shown on the chart, the other kind of factor with people who thought that the recommendations should be environmentally responsible is that more women selected that as very important to them. So next slide. So in asking people how appealing different statements were, we found that the most appealing statement about why demand should be met was that continued environmental and technical innovation means quieter, fuel-efficient planes are coming, along with service vehicles and equipment that run on clean energy and electricity. So these bars represent the counties kind of just rotated from the previous charts that you saw. And so as I mentioned in the survey question overview, we'd presented a range of statements about the benefits and consequences. And aside from this statement in particular, we found that respondents were more compelled by messages about innovation than about the consequence of not acting. To the next slide. This one is particularly hard to read the words. I'm sorry. So the colors all align with one of the counties, again in alphabetical order. And then these charts are showing various reasons to meet the demand. So the key takeaway here is that most people said economic reasons for meeting demand were compelling. And that's the cluster of lines in the middle of that chart. Go to the next one. So reading this the same way as the previous slide, asking about strongly supporting or supporting each option. And the options were to expand or improve existing airports, build a large new airport, or build a large airport and expand existing airports, or to do nothing, which is all the way on the right. So you can see that almost all respondents supported increasing capacity in one of these ways. We're at less than 10% in each county that said do nothing. And the most popular option was expanding or improving existing airports. So before we go on to the online open house, are there questions about the survey?
Lindsay, it's David. Can you describe for the commission members just general conclusions that they can draw from the survey?
Sure. So people want to be able to fly in a way that is predictable and affordable and relatively easy. They care about the environmental impacts of aviation for sure. We definitely see interest in, I don't want to make a leap too far for my research team to feel good about as I say this, but we see a lot of interest in expanding capacity at existing airports. And this is something, again, on the Puget Sound Regional Council study that they saw. People are expressing interest in existing airports and also in having options that are dispersed in areas that are not just CACC. And we didn't ask that question specifically here the same way that PSRC did, but a lot of the answers we're getting support that that conclusion. And then people are just really unaware of the capacity issue, especially people who travel less. And I think given the last year and a half, this is the first time I have been on a long flight anywhere since 2019. I think a lot of people are probably in the same place. I think it's not top of mind for folks, right? They kind of have forgotten the shuffle that it is to get through the airport.
Representative Orwell, then Senator Kaiser.
Thank you. Appreciate the survey, and maybe I'm just sensitive, but I see the first column, it says expand existing airport, and then the third one says plural airports. I'm assuming that's just a typo.
Yes.
Lindsay, my question is, if you could remind me, who was surveyed? What and how was the survey conducted?
Sure. So we mailed survey invitation letters in English and Spanish to 33,000 randomly selected households in the 8 counties that are listed on here. And the counties got a proportionate number of letters based on population. And it's a little bit more complicated than just saying,
that's fine. And how many returned the survey?
We had an 8% response rate.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think that exact number is in the survey report, and I could certainly do the math for you.
Thank you.
But I don't know off the top of my head.
So one other thing I would point out is if there was an airport that was being considered that the commission had thought this might be a possibility for expansion, we made sure that that county was included in the survey.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Representative Dent, sir, you have a question?
No, thank you, David. So just so I understand, so the first column, it says expand, improve existing airport. So was it the question specific that it would be to expand or improve CACC or just large airports?
There should be an S on that. So it was just any existing airport.
So of all the surveys that I'm looking here, really, we didn't call out any specific airport in any of the questions?
No.
Thank you.
No, and I think what's important is, this kind of follows the strategy that we had adopted early on to look at existing airports to see if they could be expanded before we moved to a new commercial airport. And so the survey reflects exactly what the commission was thinking. Joe Bram.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, Lindsay, I just wanted to address the statement that was made during the public comment in regards to community outreach. So can you define in kind of marketing terms, 8% return? Is that a good random sample? Is that a decent amount of return based on other marketing research that was done?
Yes. So our goal was 7%. I was trying to switch over to the survey report and it just crashed on me. So give me just a second to try to get that back up. But yeah, this type of mailed survey, 7% is about what we see. So 8% feels pretty good. And I'm going to open it to make sure I'm not giving you an incorrect number, but I believe our margin of error was plus or minus 2%. If I can get this to load, I will confirm that number though.
Lindsay, the slide that presents that information is, I think the second slide in your presentation, and the answer to the questions is that 2,493 people responded to the survey for 8% response rate, and the final survey has a 2% margin of error.
Perfect. I'm glad I didn't make up that number.
Okay, thank you.
Tony, sir, you had a question?
Did you call on me?
You have your hand raised, sir. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. When I look at these numbers and these statistics, these are the respondents' responses after they've been provided information about aviation needs. Is that correct?
Yes.
So in the full report, will we see what they said before they were provided information, and will we see what information they were provided? Just so we have an understanding of what they were told and how that may have influenced their responses afterwards.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And this question in particular is not something we had asked at the beginning of the survey, because without context, this would be really hard for somebody to answer, right?
So Lindsay, there's a question by Ursula that says, sorry, it just moved up. Was any of the questions geared towards a possible change towards air travel due to remote and virtual work and less business travel?
No, the questions were definitely more high level than that. We reference projections from studies such as the Puget Sound Regional Council study I've mentioned, and other studies that give us the range that I believe this group is working off of in terms of what we expect demand to look like in 10, 20, 30 years. And those studies, I'm not one of the technical people who wrote those studies, so I don't want to misspeak here, but those studies consider different options for what the future of demand might look like in coming up with their numbers. But David, correct that if I just said that wrong.
No, I think you have that right. At the time, there was not we weren't thinking about, well, the commission had talked about expanding or extending our timeline due to the unknowns associated with the return in travel. That was not really included in the survey. And to answer Ursula's other question, she asked if information regarding pollution or recent research was included in the survey. No, it was not. It was more about questions on people's general feelings about how important they felt in regards to the environment and the impacts on the environment from expanding aviation. Okay, I think we can move on to the next session, Lindsay.
Okay, great. So we can go to the next slide. So up next for us is an online open house. So that will launch, well, I'm going to back up to make sure we're all on the same page. When we talk about an online open house, it is a website that will be live for a set period of time with information about the project and a way for viewers to provide input. So this is different than like a webinar style kind of meeting that's at a certain time. Static website with questions and comment forms. So our online open house will be hosted through WashDOT's Engage platform, and it will launch on September 13th. And be live through September 26th, and it will be available in English and Spanish. The next slide. So the goals that you saw a minute ago, again, we are mapping back to these CACC public involvement goals and making sure that the online open house supports those goals and objectives of articulating the project need and purpose, status, and next steps, building trust in WSDOT and the CACC through open, transparent communication, and providing opportunities for public input. The next slide. So the online open house will include content that explains the growing demand and the limited available capacity of our existing airports, explain what the CACC is and what you all are doing right now, including information about the 6 airports identified in the phase 1 report, and it will share some of the high-level survey results and talk about what is coming next. So throughout that online open house, we'll ask multiple choice questions that are similar to some of the survey questions so we can make comparisons and have space for open-ended comments. Next slide. So we want to make sure that a huge range of audiences are aware of this opportunity to provide input. So we're promoting the online open house to audiences around the state with methods that focus on the specific communities near the 6 airports identified in the phase 1 report, on the 8 greater Puget Sound counties that primarily use CACC, and across the state. So WSDOT will promote the online open house through its existing social media channels, and we will pitch statewide media and use online and social media ads to reach people through a variety of ways. And we're also developing 2 partner toolkits. So this is basically a packet of information for project partners to share with their constituents. So one of those toolkits is for community-based organizations and service providers, particularly located around those 6 airports. And we're working to build relationships with those organizations now, and we'll send them materials to share with their members. And the other partner toolkit is where we are hoping for help from all of you. So we can go to the next slide. We are putting together a partner toolkit, and we would greatly appreciate your help in promoting the online open house through the various distribution channels that you already use to communicate with your audiences and members. We know that messages asking people to participate in public processes are more impactful when they come through a trusted organization that the recipient is already familiar with. So your help in getting the word out will have a big impact. So in early September, we'll send out a range of materials. We're including a range because we know you all communicate in different ways and all the materials won't be the right fit with the organization. But if you are comfortable and willing to share any of those materials, letting your members and audiences know that the online open house is live and an opportunity for them to provide input, that would be a huge help for us. And we can go to the next slide, which just says questions. So does anyone have questions about the online open house or the partner toolkit or anything else I have covered?
Steve, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just making sure I was can be seen and heard here. Thank you for the presentation. I guess one question I have about the online open house, and I come at this from the perspective of, I guess I'm the citizen representative, one of the citizen representatives on this commission. You know, open houses can be a source of extraordinary frustration for citizens, particularly if they are not two-way streets and actual conversations. If they end up as a one-way conduit for information, that becomes a process that creates tremendous defensive response, because engagement is not just the dissemination of information, that's marketing. Engagement is the dissemination of information with the opportunity to respond to that information and actually respond, then have a further response from the agency that is proposing the action. How will this process allow for real engagement with the community as opposed to being kind of this marketing vehicle?
Yeah, absolutely. I will very upfront that COVID has made some of this kind of challenging, right? Like we don't want to get 100 people together in a room right now. So we are designing this online open house to allow for as much two-way communication as possible. This project, I think, has a benefit that we are a year and a half into this. So we're going to pull experience from other WashShop projects or similar projects with what has worked well and what maybe hasn't. So I think starting at the beginning is just the design of this. WashShop has done a really great job making sure that the Engage platform is really easy for people to access, whether it's on a computer or on a smartphone or whatever that looks like. So kind of number one, thinking about accessibility, this will be easy for people to participate in. Then they will have opportunities throughout to answer some specific questions related to the information that they're being given on that page, and then an open-ended form at the end. So then as all of those answers come in, we'll be looking at what we're hearing from people and responding to them directly. This relies somewhat on them giving us their email and things, right? We can't respond if we don't know who they are, but there is the opportunity for them to include all of that and then for us to respond back to them. We will also have an online open house report at the end that's kind of summarized of what we heard and what we're doing about that.
So I would add to that as, as we narrow down our focus to, some select airports to expand or the potential for a greenfield site, that communication with the public will become much more robust and will be more of a one-on-one exchange as we, lay out what the commission is thinking so we can get the feedback directly from people that live in those areas and others as well.
Yeah, and I will just piggyback on that a lot of the outreach we're doing with community-based organizations serve communities that live either very close to an airport or have maybe been disproportionately impacted by aviation activities, or may have barriers to participating because of language or immigration status or technology availability. So that's a lot of the CBOs that we'll be working with to make sure those folks are aware and are able to participate.
Steve, did you have a follow-up question? Your hand's still up.
Sorry about that. I'll take it down.
Okay. And Representative Fleiser, I see you turned your video on. Did you have a comment that you wanted to make? All right, thanks, sir. So Lindsay, there's a couple more questions. One, again, can you please talk about when is the open house?
Yeah, September 13th through 26th.
And then Ursula asks, how can one suggest parties to the open house?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
Ursula, do you want to unmute yourself and ask that question directly, please?
Yes, I'm unmuted. What other organizations? I mean, right now it's just a dog and pony show for more airport expansion. How can we get I call them parties, other groups, other interests into the conversation to have a meaningful conversation, a discord and discussion of all aspects? We are in an environmental crisis. I don't think people understand how much yet, but this is a long-term plan, so this should be planned out well. Also in view of environmental impacts, but also global warming.
So I'll help address that. So respectively speaking, Ursula, this is not a dog and pony show. We want to hear from people like yourself and how they feel about expansion. The commission is going to make recommendations based on partly the need for Washington State, but also what people feel is important as we move forward. And then I'll turn it back over to Lindsay, see if she has any other comments.
Yeah, so I think part of your question here is about who is invited to participate in this process. And that to us is absolutely anybody who is willing to spend some of their time. You know, we recognize we're asking for people to invest time in coming to this online open house and give us some feedback, but it's absolutely open to anyone. And if there are specific organizations that you want to make sure we are inviting, I'm happy to hear who those are and make sure we're including them on our list. We have definitely worked with a lot of partners who work in the aviation area in the state to make sure we're trying to reach organizations that care about aviation and environment and the impacts of aviation. Definitely not just groups that are.
I'm sorry, I turned my microphone on again, just to clarify maybe one more time. I'm talking about equal participants who are presenting information, not invited to hear the information and to give you feedback, but actually truly equal parts in the discussion, who are presenting, you know, potentially other information that you have presented so far. So just to really get a full picture.
Ursula, this is Rob. I'd just say stay tuned. Later in this presentation, I think we'll be introducing exactly what you're looking for.
Okay, we're going to take one more question. I see we have a guest, Bernadine, with your hand up. Bernadine. Bernadine, we can't hear you if you're trying to talk. Please try again or enter your question into the chat.
Bernadine, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and move on because I think Bernie's having some problems. Again, Bernadine, if you would enter your question or comments into the chat for us. So thank you, Lindsay. I just want to stay understanding, taking into consideration what people outside the commission feel is very important to us, and it's an essential factor in the work. So we appreciate the teamwork with PRR. Next up, we are going to transition and hear from Elena Austin from University of Washington and Chris Johnson from Public Health Seattle and King County on the community health and airport operations related noise and air pollution report that was provided to the legislators. Steve Edmiston is going to follow up with his thoughts about the report and considerations for the CACC. I think we're going to take a quick break in between Steve's comments and the comments from both Chris and Elena. So with that, welcome Elena and Chris, and over to you.
Well, thank you for having us. I am Chris Johnson, an evaluation manager with Public Health Seattle and King County, and both of these studies were part of a state legislative proviso in different bills. And so if you want to go to the next slide, please. The proviso very specifically asked Public Health in King County to look, basically it asked for a comprehensive literature review and a community health needs assessment, a community health profile using existing data sources, and then what recommendations we had for next steps based on this information. So it was a very limited, well-defined scope. For the community health profiles, the areas we looked at are represented by the red circles on the screen that you see, and it was a region within 1 mile of CACC Airport, 1 to 5 miles, and then 5 to 10 miles. And these radii are based on studies that others have done, including the LAX study that Dr. Austin will talk about a little bit later. It's really important for us to understand that essentially it was a comprehensive literature review using standards and strength of evidence criteria borrowed from the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. We cannot link the health outcomes you see in a causal way to the effects of the air pollution that we're going to talk about that came out of the literature review. This is a descriptive study, and that's just important for us to keep in mind because you're going to see that communities within 10 miles of CACC Airport are particularly vulnerable in a couple of ways. So next slide, please. The first finding that really struck us is that while King County is 40% roughly people of color, the majority of several communities live within 10 miles of the airport. And so I'm going to start calling that airport communities. So airport communities is anybody living within 10 miles of CACC Airport. And so you can see here that roughly 3/4 of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders and Black African American people live within 10 miles of the airport, and over half of Hispanic Latino residents of King County live within that 10-mile range. It is also, the screen does not show it, but the report also shows that the communities have a slightly higher proportion of children compared to the balance of King County, the rest of King County. There's also a larger proportion of immigrants that reside within 10 miles of the airport compared to the rest of King County. Next slide, please. The take-home points from the community health profile analysis, which again relied on existing data, showed that people within these airport communities face disparities in health risk factors, and resources. So they are more vulnerable compared to the rest of King County, and they're also more likely to be exposed to air and noise pollution related to that airport. So that adds to their vulnerability. In some measures, health outcomes worsened in the range that was closest, most proximal to the airport. And these include elements like the hospitalization rate for heart disease was significantly higher the closer the region was to the airport. The rates of death were higher, more proximal to the airport you are. Rate of death from heart disease, and life expectancy was lower in the area closest to the airport, and a little bit, it was 5 years within the 1 mile radius, 2 years lower than the balance of county within the 5 to 10 mile radius from CACC Airport. It's also important for us to understand that these risk factors and the disparities range from birth to death. So they run the span of the life course. And you'll see that in the next few slides. So next slide, please. Thank you. So to begin with, mothers in airport communities were 43% more likely to have a premature birth than the rest of King County. The data are not shown here, but the mothers were also more likely to give birth to infants with low birth weights compared to the rest of King County. And I won't go over the data too much, but you can see in the bars, the bar to the furthest to the furthest left is the 1 mile range, and then the bar to the right is the rest of King County. Next slide, please. Airport communities had twice as many children living in poverty or near poverty compared to the rest of King County. And all these differences that I'm talking about are significant differences, and the methodology is explained in the report. And while the data are not shown, it is also true that this region has a higher proportion of adults who live in poverty or near poverty compared to the balance of county. Next slide, please. Adults were also more likely to be uninsured in airport communities than the rest of King County. And while the data are not shown here, they were also more likely to report having not gotten medical care due to the expense of that medical care compared to the balance of county. Next slide. Airport communities had a higher rate of hospitalization from heart disease than did the rest of the county. Next slide. They also had a higher rate of hospitalization from stroke. And next slide. And also diabetes. So again, the airport communities within that 10-mile range had a higher rate of hospitalization from diabetes compared to the rest of King County. And next slide. Airport communities also had a higher rate of death than King County overall, and a higher rate of death for some specific outcomes that included death from heart disease and death from, I want to say death from diabetes. So that gives you an idea, right? So this is just a range of outcomes. There's much more data in the actual report, but I wanted to give you a sample of the health profile data that are summarized in the report. And I think next slide, and then I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Austin to talk to you. Oh, sorry, not yet. So let me talk about the lit review first. So the comprehensive lit review showed us, so again, the literature review looked at existing evidence. A lot of it, the starting place was assessments conducted per pollutant by the EPA, and those are conducted by a team of scientists. And we conducted a strength of evidence analyses based on EPA standards. And what that means, so when we talk about a causal or likely causal relationship between a pollutant and a health outcome, we're talking about multiple studies and a high level of evidence that controlled for potential other causes. So the EPA is fairly strict, and if they're talking about a likely causal relationship or a causal relationship between a pollutant and a health effect, there's a great body of evidence that includes studies on animals and oftentimes humans. So what we see in the literature is that there's significant evidence of a likely causal or causal relationship between noise pollution and hypertension and heart disease among adults, and poor school performance among children. There's also some suggestive evidence of a link between noise pollution and memory retention in adults, but again, that hasn't risen to the same level of evidence as the outcomes you see here. The air pollutants that have been tied to airport operations include the particulate matter of different sizes that Dr. Austin will talk a bit about. It also includes ozone and black carbon, some hazardous air pollutants, carbon monoxide, the sulfur oxides. So there's a number of pollutants. Overall, as a group, their exposure to these pollutants is linked to respiratory issues, including pulmonary, COPD, the cardiopulmonary disorders, asthma, other respiratory diseases, cardiovascular issues, including high blood pressure, stroke, and heart disease, nervous system issues, including dementia, and oxidative stress it's part of our stress response, and has a significant impact on the nervous system. There's also a likely causal relationship in many cases to metabolical issues, including diabetes. And then there's new evidence linking particulate matter to reproductive health concerns, including preterm births. Next slide, please. So what the literature review showed is that we do need to know more about exposure. There have been several studies nationally and internationally that link noise and air pollution to airport operations, which include aircraft and ground transportation, to adverse health effects. Locally, we have limited evidence. What we know and what's cited in the report is the 2018 Beacon Hill study showing that there are time periods at which the noise resulting from airport operations exceeds World Health Organization recommendations. And then Puget Sound Clean Air Agency does some annual reports that show particulate matter levels over EPA recommendations. But there is definitely more we could learn about what exposures lead to what levels of harm and how much exposure do we actually have going on under the flight path and in surrounding areas. And next slide. And now I'll pass it off to Dr. Austin to summarize the Move Up study results. Thanks all.
Thank you very much. And so similar to the work that was presented by Dr. Johnson, I'll be presenting today the results of a state-funded study called the Move Up study that was conducted at the University of Washington through budget proviso. And the objectives stated in the budget proviso for our team were to study the implications of air traffic at the CACC airport, and particularly to assess the concentrations of ultrafine particulate matter in areas surrounding and directly impacted by air traffic. And that was defined as a 10-mile radius around the airport. And we were tasked with distinguishing between and comparing concentrations of aircraft-related and other sources of ultrafine particles, and to coordinate with local governments and share results and solicit feedback from the community. And so this report directly complements, I believe, the report presented by Dr. Johnson in trying to do some direct measurements of the air quality impacting the airport communities. Next slide, please. So the reason there was an interest and concern around ultrafine particles are that ultrafine particles are currently unregulated by the US CPA in terms of their emissions as well as their community level concentrations in the air, but they are potentially important in determining health outcomes, and that's based on literature review, both at the time that this study was funded and emerging evidence since we've completed this work. The health effects of ultrafine particles are more uncertain as compared to PM 2.5, which is particulates with a diameter of less than 2.5 micrometers. PM 2.5 is currently regulated by the EPA and routinely measured in the Puget Sound area. And the effects of ultrafine particles are in particular associated with neurological and birth outcomes. Important sources include diesel combustion, such as truck traffic, aircraft traffic, as well as other combustion processes such as wood smoke and photochemical processes. And there are, ultrafine particles are highly variable, both spatially, so if you measure across different locations, as well as over time. Next slide, please. Some important characteristics of ultrafine particles are they have a larger surface area relative to their size as compared to PM 2.5, and they are small enough to enter the bloodstream, cross the placenta and cross the blood-brain barrier, and this has been shown in animal exposure studies. And because they are small, they have very little mass, so very little weight, and therefore they are not captured in PM 2.5 measures, which are a mass-based measurement. And for ultrafine particles, we typically report the count, so the number of particles in a certain volume of air rather than the mass. And the image here depicts the locations in the respiratory system where particles are thought to deposit. And you can see that for PM10, which is a larger ambient air pollutant, we have deposition in the upper airway of the human body. And as particles get smaller, they penetrate deeper into the lungs until you get to the ultrafine particles, or the PM 0.1, represented on the right-hand side, where we have deposition in the lungs, as well as translocation from the lungs into other areas of the body. Next slide, please. So the Move Up study was a measurement study, and so we actually equipped a mobile platform, or a car, with high quality air sampling instruments. And we have a picture here in panel C showing you some of the instruments that were operating during our mobile monitoring. Monitoring was conducted during the year 2018 and 19. And in panel A, you can see a map showing the airport location and the transects, or routes, that we sampled repeatedly over the course of this year. There were 5 routes to the north of the airport and 6 routes to the south. You can also see here depicted in blue dots the relative density of flights as they approach and depart from CACC Airport that are below 750 meters in altitude. We actually also have some flights from other airports shown here. Again, all these flights are below 750 meters, and that was to capture the air traffic thought to contribute to ultrafine particles, so that these flights would emit ultrafine that could reach ground level or community. Next slide, please. I'm very quickly presenting the main results from our study. I invite you, you should have access to these slides. I invite you to go see our published paper describing our methods, or in a later slide, we'll link to the report that was provided to the legislature. Over the course of our year of sampling, we identified 2 main features in the ultrafine particles that we were sampling. The first was a road wave feature. So it was a feature that we saw high values of on major roadways, including I-5. This feature was positively correlated with black carbon, or soot, and had high total particle number concentration. So when we counted the total particles and volume of air, we found high concentrations, again, along these major traffic routes. And the median diameter for this roadway feature was 30 nanometers, 30, which is similar to reported values for traffic-related air pollution in the literature. The second feature that we identified was what we termed an ultrafine particle feature, and this feature was not associated with high traffic roadways. You can see there are relatively low concentrations on I-5 and other high traffic routes. It was negatively correlated with black carbon, or soot, and the median diameter of this ultrafine feature was approximately 15 nanometers, so significantly smaller than the on-road feature. Next slide, please. We did additional analyses to identify the association between this ultrafine feature and aircraft traffic. We found that the ultrafine feature was associated with landing aircraft, so on the landing side of the airport, and that was also demonstrated to have higher emissions of particles per kilogram of jet fuel burned as compared to the emissions of ultrafine particles seen on the roadway per kilogram of Our main conclusions were that the ultrafine particles are emitted from both traffic and aircraft sources, and that the total concentration of ultrafine particles, so if you measure the total number of particles with diameters between 10 and 1,000 nanometers, this did not distinguish between roadway and aircraft features. However, the spatial impact of traffic and aircraft ultrafine particle emissions can be separated using a combination of mobile monitoring and standard statistical methods. And there are key differences in the particle size distribution and the black carbon concentration for these roadway and aircraft features. And in particular, the aircraft feature was associated with a much larger fraction of ultrafine particles or particles between 10 and 20 nanometers. And aircraft landing, as I mentioned, were associated with these ultrafine particles. And you can see a summary of the report, both a policy summary as well as the full report by going to our website, linked here, dohs.washington.edu/move-up. Next slide, please. So I wanted to also provide a slight overview of emerging research that has been published since our both of these reports were finalized. The first is a systematic literature review of air quality in close proximity to airports. This paper overviews some of the, in particular, ultrafine impacts of aircraft activity that have been observed in near airport communities throughout the United States as well as internationally. And then the second emerging research that I wanted to highlight today are two papers from academic partners based in Los Angeles, looking at the association of aircraft ultrafine particles and preterm births in communities neighboring LAX airport, as well as a second paper recently released looking at the association of aircraft ultrafine particle and the risk of malignant brain cancer at LAX. And both of these papers found a positive association between exposures to airport-related ultrafine particles, independent of any exposures to traffic-related ultrafine particles on both the preterm birth and the malignant brain cancer risk. Next slide, please. Some of the next steps I wanted to share with you, some of the research that's being conducted now at the University of Washington on this topic. As part of the Move Up study, we worked with our advisory group composed of legislators and community members and agencies to identify research gaps. And the three gaps that were identified were: what are the health effects of aircraft ultrafine particles? What can we do to reduce human exposures to ultrafine particles now? And how are concentrations of ultrafine particles, how do they compare within different communities? And there are 4 projects currently ongoing. The first 2 address gap number 2, which is what can we do to reduce human exposures? There's been a lot of interest in affected communities in understanding what can be done. And we are currently completing a school resilience to air pollution project that was funded by some of the airport communities listed here, including Burien, Des Moines, Federal Way, Normandy Park, and CACC, where we measure the infiltration of ultrafine particles into school environments and the potential impact of HEPA filters, portable HEPA filters. This has led to a wider investigation to understand the impact of portable HEPA filter interventions in schools and its effect on indoor air quality and student performance. And this was just recently funded by the state of Washington and is going to be ongoing for the next 2 years. We're also conducting a complementary study to try and understand the health effects of ultrafine particles from a variety of sources, including aircraft and wildfire smoke. This is funded by the US EPA. and it's going to be an intervention study looking at differences in lung growth of children who receive an intervention to improve indoor air quality in their classrooms as compared to students who do not. Lastly, we are working to characterize the chemical content of urban nanoparticles, both traffic and aircraft related, to advance our understanding of sources and of impacts on communities. Next slide, please. And I'll turn this back over to Dr. Johnson to wrap up.
Thank you. The recommendations that we made based on the research that we just went over with you, the studies, are general by design because scope of intervention is different at the federal level to the state level to the county level, and we will be most successful at improving community health if we work at all three levels. So the general recommendations that we made based on the evidence to date are that we need to address the health disparities within air communities and improve health equity and resource equity in that area. We also very much need to mitigate the health impacts of airport operations and ground transportation. And that means the existing efforts that we've used for mitigation, as well as new development and implementation of new strategies. We need to implement new technologies to improve our measurement and systematically measure exposures, both indoors and outdoors. Dr. Austin alluded to it, but there's new research that measures within airport communities the level of air pollutants outside of schools and apartment buildings and then inside schools and apartment buildings. And there's studies that suggest that there's no difference without some of the interventions that she mentioned. So we very much also want to expand the systematic monitoring of air pollutants, both indoors and outdoors, in residences, but also in those public spaces, schools, child care settings, and long-term care facilities. And we would like to support research to address the gaps in our knowledge, although we are learning more all the time. Next slide. I want to mention King County's next steps. The Strategic Climate Action Plan calls for, and the Executive's Office is currently pulling together, a joint aircraft emissions technical and community task force. That task force is going to involve many, many parties, including the Port of Seattle, I hope and think, and it will review methodologies to account for aircraft emissions and recommend a baseline level for King County's emissions inventory, and then evaluate also the effectiveness and feasibility of these strategies to reduce aircraft emissions. And then King County plans to partner with regional agencies, including Puget Sound Regional Council, Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, Port of Seattle, and the King County Cities Climate Collaboration to advocate for a regional approach to aircraft transportation planning that reduces aircraft greenhouse gas emissions. And so those are some direct next steps that the county will be taking. And now we can take questions and thoughts if people want to share them.
Well, thanks, Elena and Chris. I see that Senator Kaiser has had her hand up for quite some time. So Senator Kaiser, please go ahead. You're on mute.
You might be muted.
Yeah, I see that. No problem at all. I really first have to thank Dr. Johnson, Chris, and Elena Austin. You two have been such incredible resources and such hardworking partners in coming to really define some of the issues we're dealing with here in our airport communities. But one thing that I'd like you to explain a little more clearly is the issue of proximity, or what you might call the boundaries of the study, so that people understand that we're not talking about 15 miles necessarily from an airport, where the impacts are measured to be most intense and most concerning.
No, thank you for that. And we could go back to that slide if that's helpful, if the person managing the slides wants to do that. But essentially, the proviso specified that we look in general, the area is a 10-mile radius around the airport. So the maximum circle is a 10-mile radius around the airport, around CACC Airport. And that was specified by the state legislature in the proviso bill. And then within that 10-mile radius, we looked at 3 areas: within 1 mile of the airport, within 1 to 5 miles of the airport, and within 5 to 10 miles in the airport. So when
And there
I
were-
showed,
and if I recall correctly, there were significant differences in the health disparities between the 1 and 5 mile and the 10-mile radius.
for
correct?
some outcomes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the report goes over significance, and there's an appendix that explains it. So for those of you that want the technicalities, please always feel free to reach out with questions, and there are appendices that spell out all of the technicalities. Most of the testing, significant testing that we did, was to say, are the differences between the 3 radii, the 1 mile radii, the 1 to 5 mile radii, and the 5 to 10 mile radii, are they significantly different from the rest of the county, from the balance of the county? So when we say that something is significant, we were looking at that. But when I talked about for some measures, the more proximal, the closer you live to the airport, the greater the health effects. In that case, we are talking about significant differences within those regions, the 1 mile radii, the 1 to 5 mile radii, and then the 5 to 10 mile radii.
And just a final follow-up with Elena, the measurements for the ultrafine particles and the ultrafine particles were in landing patterns at airports when the aircraft was at, what did you say, 750 meters?
So, yeah, that's a great question. So what we saw was there was a shift in the impacted, the north and south impact of that aircraft ultrafine feature based on the landing direction of the aircraft. So when we looked at the monitoring periods where we were monitoring below the landing aircrafts, we saw an increase in the ultrafine feature. When we were monitoring on the takeoff side, we did not see that increase. And
the height of the aircraft also mattered, correct?
So we looked at the height of the aircraft in terms of defining the area of our sampling, and that aligned with the 10-mile radius. We also saw an increase in the intensity of the ultrafine feature in the landing as the aircraft descended.
Thank you.
Representative Fye, and then Representative Orwell.
Thank you. This is very interesting. My experience has been because of the non-attainment situation in Pierce County has been focused more to the 2.5 category, right? Spent a lot of time during my time on the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. Is there a difference in this with respect, or is there any added effect because of to the north because of Boeing Field and the Renton Airport? Is that different than to the south, or is that just maybe a negligible thing?
No, that's a very good question. Our sampling routes weren't, they were really located equidistant north and south from the CACC airport, and so it was a little bit harder to make conclusions regarding Boeing Field and Renton based on our data. But we did see higher impacts on the north side, and we hypothesized that it could be due to that. It could also be due that in general there are more landings occurring on the north side, so it's approximately 60% of the landings on the north side over the course of a year and 40% on the south side. So again, the impacts did shift to the south during that 40% period where the landings were occurring to the south. So good question, but we can't completely answer the differential impact of Boeing Field and Renton. The other question, I think, related to the non-compliance with PM 2.5, and I didn't mention this, but our sampling was really conducted during the afternoon hours. So in part, we didn't see much effect of wood smoke, which is contributing to some of the PM 2.5 that we see in Pierce County and other areas of Puget Sound.
Thank you.
Representative Orwell.
Yes, thank you. First, I just want to say thank you to Chris and to Alana. You have been incredible partners. We really appreciate you. I really appreciate you're looking both at measurements and mitigation at the same time. And Alana, I don't know if you can kind of speak to what we're finding about mitigation and the use of air purifiers and what impact that they can have. What have we learned?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So again, as part of a pilot study, we have been measuring the indoor air quality in 5 schools in proximity to some of these areas. And we do find both infiltration of these ultra-fine particles into indoor spaces. And this is consistent, as Chris mentioned, with studies in other airport communities. And our initial analyses, although we're still conducting sampling, is that the HEPA filters do significantly reduce the ultra-fine component of air pollution and also the larger sizes when deployed indoors. And so we're going to continue that work and hope to report on that in the near future. But it does seem that these portable HEPA filter units have a positive impact on the indoor air quality.
Thank you. Any other questions from commission members? I've got a couple myself. So hearing none, in the research, was the use of sustainable aviation fuel looked at this point and how it could reduce emissions?
So I think I'll field this question. We didn't have information on the particular mixtures of fuels of the aircrafts that were overhead when we were sampling. We did do a literature review on the emissions of ultrafine particles internally for different fuel mixtures, including biofuels. And it does seem that it depends on the formulation of the biofuels being used as to the emissions of ultrafine particles. So right now in the literature, there isn't a consistent direction in the change in emissions based on modifying or changing fuel sources.
Okay, thanks. And the other question that was posed to me, and I don't know the answer, so I just said I would ask you. You mentioned literature review. Was a peer review conducted of either one of the studies?
So there was a peer review conducted on the Move Up results, and on our main findings, you can find a link to that paper, which is published in Environmental Science and Technology.
We also had a peer review done for the literature review section of the public health report. We had several subject matter experts across the state, at some at DOH and some at the university, review and validate the findings of that literature review, and those subject matter experts are listed in the introduction of the report.
Okay, thank you. I hope that those that asked the question are actually listening right now. So much appreciated. We do have one guest, and I'll remind the guests that after the public comment period, we take these sporadically because this is meant for commission members, but I'm going to ask Sheila to ask her question.
My question is only, how long is your break, and is it customary to take a break when you're only an hour and 20 minutes into the meeting?
Yes, we are going to take a break directly after this.
Yeah, I just wanted to know how long your break was.
It's going to be about 10 minutes. Thank you. Any other questions? So once again, thank you both for presenting to the commission members. This request has been long in coming. So, and this is one of the most important things about our work is understanding, some of the implications behind expanding airport capacity. So again, thank you, and we really appreciate your time and your comments.
Well, thanks for having us, and thanks for the questions and discussion.
Great. So we are going to take an official 10 minutes before we get to Steve's comments. And Chris and Elaine, if you have the time to stay on, there may be some questions that come out of Steve's comments as well. So thank you. All right, we'll take 10. We'll see everybody in just a few minutes.
I'm here.
Okay, thanks. And before I turn it over to Steve, I see there have been a lot of comments or questions in the chat box in regards to the 6 sites that the commission has looked at thus far, and whether or not a green site has been selected. Well, to answer the question, it's a little complicated, depending on whether or not we're talking about commercial air service, air cargo, or general aviation. The commission went through and looked at each one of those airports with feedback from both the public and the sponsors and said, this is what we think each one of those airports is best suited to do right now. So I'm welcome to take any questions after this meeting to further discuss that. Rob is also going to talk about the aviation system plan and how that will look at, help us look at greenfield site possibilities specifically. So to answer that question from Representative Orcutt, so there is not a greenfield site on the list yet. It's one of the things we're hoping to achieve through the aviation system plan. So Steve, over to you.
So get the camera turned on here. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Thank you. And I also want to thank Chris Johnson and Elena Austin for the work that they have done and the presentation today. And I want to thank my friends at WSDOT who are hosting this, and the members of this commission for allowing me some time to speak to the commission today on a matter that I think is very important, certainly with respect to my role here. My name is Steve Edmiston, for those that don't know me. Of the 15 voting commissioners, I am one of the 2 voting commissioners appointed to represent the interests of the citizens of the state of Washington. It's a little bit interesting that in our commission's founding legislation, the 2 citizen representatives are the only representatives assigned an actual to-do mandate in the founding legislation. As a citizen appointee, my job is first to, and I'm quoting, represent the public interests in the communities that are included in the commission's site research, and second, to understand the impacts of a large commercial aviation facility on a community. I may have been an unusual choice for this role. I don't work in aviation or transportation industries. I don't practice aviation law. I'm not a scientist. Of course, I have been a community advocate for some CACC airport neighbor communities for some time. And perhaps it is by analogy then that my work relating to those airport communities somehow landed me this plum assignment to help recommend a new airport site. There is one thing that I know from my experience that I believe is useful. I know what it's like to ask some very personal questions as someone who has lived under a flight path for 50 years. And those questions are these. Why did I become ill? Was it because I lived near an airport? In my own case, I'll never be able to demonstrate, nor will I try, to find a specific causation between my own illnesses that include stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma and AML leukemia, for which I received 2 stem cell transplants. And I understand it is likely impossible for any one individual to prove a causal connection between their specific illness and their life near an airport. I do understand that for me, my illnesses put me in the category of correlation and not causation. And I bring this up to breathe some life into the questions that many folks that live in a candidate city for a new airport will ask themselves. And those are, what will it mean if my family is going to be living beneath a flight path in the future? Will someone in my family become ill? So hopefully this context helps explain why this last spring, when I first learned of the Public Health Seattle and King County report on the public health impact of CACC, I ask that the report be placed on our commission's agenda, because when I read this report, to me, these numbers are real people living near CACC. In addition to the demographics you just heard, these numbers are things. These are things that have happened to friends and relatives, mothers, fathers, children, entrepreneurs, teachers, and students. What I read in the report shocked me. What I saw in this report, personally, I can never unsee. Let's go to the next slide, please. Fortunately, our guiding principles will allow us, they even direct us, to use the learnings from this public health report in siting a new airport. We are seeking the greater good. We are not here to benefit a specific group. We are here to assure social equity and ensure our needs today will not jeopardize the ability of future generations to meet their needs. We are here to assure underrepresented individuals have a voice. Next slide, please. It's important to recall this context as well. Our original legislation was predicated on this legislative finding. I'm quoting, that increased air traffic operations and projections for air traffic expansion has led to increased concerns regarding the environmental, health, social, and economic impacts of air traffic. Next slide, please. All of that was placed in further context for us at the outset of this commission. We have projected a 400,000 plus operational flight gap by 2050. It will not be placed at CACC. And so our mission was to find a new primary airport and or seek expansion of other airports to fill the gap. Our founding legislation requires we take into consideration the data and conclusions of appropriate air traffic studies, community representatives, and industry experts. And our research must include potential environmental, community, and economic impacts. Now fast forward as the last bullet on this slide states, at our last meeting, April 29, 2021, our white paper listed 6 airports, none of which are greenfields as of now. Next slide, please. So here we are at the report, and we had the wonderful presentation. Everyone will have a copy or has access to it. These are by our top public health scientists and professionals in the state. Next slide, please. Why does this report matter for the CACC? First of all, it's new. It didn't exist when we were formed. It provides this commission a public health case study from our own backyard, conducted by our own public health professionals. And while our mission is to select a new site, or a site plus a series of expansions, as the citizen representative, I must, as our legislation states, understand the impacts of a large commercial aviation facility on a community. And this report is literally about the impacts of a large commercial aviation facility on a community. So it would appear to me this report is critical as a foundation for all of our work going forward. Next slide, please. Why does this report matter for the communities that will be considered? When we look at the numbers, I hope we will all be thinking about what it means to metaphorically knock on a community's door and say, we'd like to build or expand an airport here. And the one public health case study that we have shows there may be significant health disparities, increased hospitalizations, and that life expectancies near a primary commercial airport may decrease by as much as 5 years. Next slide, please. If our only case study says this regarding excess deaths and proximity to an airport, we need to think now as a commission, sooner rather than later, about how we might conjoin such a message to communities with what we're actually going to do about this. so that it at least makes sense to any community that we consider that we might place an airport or expand an airport. We might consider that anytime we conduct outreach to communities promoting the economic needs and benefits of an airport, that we have a real vision as a commission, a real plan, even an intent to fully address the public health consequences. And here, just for illustration, just to get a number in our heads that might place you in the same sort of shocked position I was in. Here's an interesting comparison. The report shares increased cancer deaths may be high at 1.1 to 1.4 higher than expected. They increase with proximity. Increased stroke deaths are up 1.4 to 1.9 times higher near CACC, increasing with proximity. When I looked at these ranges, the number 1.4 stuck in my mind, and I couldn't figure out why. I did figure it out, why it was in my mind. You might remember that in March 23rd of 2020, that was the day our state issued a first shutdown and a stay-home order from COVID. The national rate of excess deaths from COVID at that very time, measured 2 weeks later on April 11, 2020, was 1.4. A 1.4% excess death rate from COVID, and it was a public health emergency, and we shut our state down. With that same rate of excess death, we are simply living around CACC. This is what I mean in part when I say I can't unsee these numbers. Next slide, please. We will always want more study, more research. For this reason, for me, perhaps the most useful thing about this report are the tools that are provided to assess where we are right now with measuring the strength of the relationship between noise and pollution and harm to humans in a public health context. The public health Seattle and King County here define what it means when it uses the word causal. When multiple high-quality studies conducted by multiple researchers shows the exposure leads to the health outcome in question, the biological pathways of harm are supported by the evidence available, and alternative explanations have been ruled out. Why is this important for where we cite a new airport? Next slide, please. I think the answer is because we can say that in the aggregate or in the abstract, there are negative health outcomes for cardiovascular, sleep, and annoyance from noise that are causal, and negative school performance that is likely causal from noise. Next slide, please. And here we can say that in the aggregate or the abstract, that the report shares that the negative health outcomes for cardiovascular and respiratory illnesses in both short-term exposures and long-term exposures from fine particulate exposures are causal. Next slide, please. So how should this report inform our work? Hopefully, as a threshold, we are all on this commission in agreement that this report will be important to the communities we will consider as a commission. I would point out three things. One is this, to my knowledge, is the only comprehensive Washington State dedicated public health care case study for an airport the size of CACC. This report fits squarely within our research mandate. And here I think the last bullet is key. The report provides a tool to assess the relative degree of public health impacts at new or expanded sites. And certainly this report will be the subject of more study. It recommends such in this report. Certainly this report will be challenged. I understand it is being challenged already. But I also understand that public health and CACC Airport are seeking to work collaboratively to address these findings and conclusions, which is fantastic. which is the right thing to do. As a commission, we might also want to pay attention to what's going on right now in federal court in the Western District of Washington, where our state, represented by our Attorney General Bob Ferguson's office, is suing the Navy in relation to a proposed 33% increase in Whidbey Island Navy Growler overflights. And our state is taking the very same position that I'm suggesting we take as a commission, that we take into account all available new and emerging information about public health impacts from noise and pollution from aviation operations. The state of Washington in the lawsuit is rejecting the Navy's assertion that the standard of harm to a community must be proven by a definitive causal relationship. Our state is saying in federal court that studies like this study from public health must be considered, and that it is not enough to comply with outdated standards or what our state calls stale data, still on the books, like a 65 DNL. Instead, we are required to take a hard look at the emerging science and quantify the actual harms that we can predict based on what science is now telling us. This is a huge shift. It will be a paradigm shift. And the state's position in federal court goes to the heart of the very same questions I believe our citizens will ask us as we consider urban sites for an airport expansion or a new airport. We will be asked, will I become ill? Will someone in my family become ill? And most importantly, we will be asked, what are you going to do to help assure my safety? Next slide, please. I have 3 recommendations as a member of the commission. I think the first one's easy. We amend our guiding principles to expressly add the phrase public health to our environmental responsibility and social equity principles. I think the next recommendation is also easy. I hope that we would add the public health Seattle-King County report to our list of studies informing our CACC analysis. This would become the 11th study that we list. Currently, none of the studies that we list as informing our analysis are about public health in relation to a primary commercial airport. And the final bullet, I suppose, could be harder, but I am asking only for consideration, that we retain an appropriate independent set of experts or consultants to help the commission assess and frame the ballpark costs that we will likely incur relating to actual public health mitigation, and particularly in relation to comparing the public health mitigation costs of an urban airport setting or expansion, or a rural greenfield airport setting or expansion. Given the report's findings and recommendations, and that our mission is to site a new airport or expand, I believe we need to think of some way to frame the ballpark costs that we will be incurring. For example, if adequate public health measures for residences within 10 miles of a new primary commercial airport, say school and residential noise reduction packages, ultrafine particle air filtration technology that we've been discussing, if all of that triples the actual cost of an urban expansion compared to a greenfield, and I have no idea, I just don't know, but it would seem highly relevant to the very front end of our decision-making process when examining possible sites, including greenfields. I would ask that our commission adopt each of these 3 recommendations. I don't know if I have the power to do this. If I don't, I'll be told so. Other entities I have served on, we do it by motion. I would offer a motion to adopt these recommendations. With that, I'm happy to take questions, and thank you all for listening. I really deeply appreciate it.
Steve, I personally want to say thanks for that very personal and well thought out presentation. I do have a couple questions, but I want to make sure other members are able to chime in before I do. So I see a couple members have just popped on. Eric, you have your hand raised. Eric, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry. First off, Jeffrey Brown, of course, our airport COO I'm Eric from the Port of Seattle. Jeffrey Brown can't be here, so I wanted to offer his apologies. He's, I think, in a day-long budget retreat, so I'm sure he'd rather be here. But given some of the subject matter presented, I wanted to bring somebody from our airport environmental department as well. Steve mentioned that we've been in touch with King County. Leslie Stanton is our senior environmental manager at the airport, and she's been working with the county to address some of our questions about the study methodology. So I'm going to give her a few seconds here. And I'm getting an echo in case somebody can mute, so I don't have to hear myself talk. Just maddening. But I just wanted to say about this study and our role in various studies. We've been glad to work alongside a lot of the folks in this room on advocacy about airport challenges in the legislature. I think pretty much every year there's been something. Last year we worked on legislation related to noise insulation. And previously, we've participated in some of the study work. The Move Up study, which Dr. Austin presented on, was something that we supported as it went through the legislature. Our commission put forward money towards it. We funded the literature review that was undertaken by the Department of Health. And we had our technical staff sitting on the technical advisory committee. We stand by the results of the study, and we're glad to see them considered by this commission, and even studies that we weren't initially supportive of, namely the Department of Commerce study. Even still, as the airport operator, we provided tons of data to the consultants that were hired. And we've said over and over that we want to be in these conversations. We want to partner. We want to help the region understand airport impacts, like Steve discussed. When funding for this public health King County study went through, we didn't engage in development of the language. At that time, we were really focused on the Move Up study, which was not yet completed and turned into the legislature. So we definitely want to discuss the issues raised by the legislative, by the work directed by the legislature, but we just wanted to surface a couple of our technical questions. So I'll turn it over to Leslie. I know some of our technical questions were already shared in the chat, and so Leslie, I think, can just sort of summarize, and then we can conclude our comments.
Sure. Yep. Thanks, Eric. I'll just really quickly, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate Chris's work and the county's work on this, and UW as well. I really appreciated also, Chris, your presentation and the focus on being really clear about what the study concludes and doesn't conclude about causal relationships. And I just would echo Eric's statements that we really strongly support good science, and we've funded a number of studies, and we'll continue to do so, especially around ultrafine particles, which is an emerging air pollutant, and we really want to learn more about that. We did work with the state health department to understand what is the literature out there, what should we be doing, what more can we be doing. And I also wanted to echo strong support for the commission's work on equity and Chris's work on equity, to notice that, there are many communities that are vulnerable and underserved in our broader community, and we need to make sure that we're protecting them as well. So just to comment, I also appreciated the UW and county's recommendation for more exposure information. I think a formal exposure assessment would be really helpful here, and that would help us get a good understanding of what the ambient concentrations are. And I know that funding is a problem, but there is readily available data that can be downloaded online from like the US EPA's National Ambient Air Toxics Assessment. There's also modeling and monitoring data throughout the region that can be looked at to get an estimate of what is it people are actually being exposed to, and then compare that to the toxicity information around causality that Chris was referring to. I think that would be really insightful for people to see which parts of these emissions are, if they're close to a level of toxicity or if they're nowhere near it. And in addition to that, how does that look with the rest of the pollution that we're all exposed to every day? We know that I-5 and other places have, lots of diesel emissions, and those also, I think, as the UW study and the slides here showed, also emit ultrafine particles. So there's also this broader exposure that I think we need to consider when we're thinking about a new airport. So, and the last thing we would just recommend is that I know that Chris touched on the parts of the study that were peer reviewed, we would really encourage a formal peer review process that includes the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency and also US EPA, of course. Both of those organizations are experts in air quality and toxicology, risk assessment and exposure from environmental impacts. And we would just encourage that those folks be included in this work as well. So again, we're just very supportive, really appreciate all the fine work, and looking forward to working with everybody.
Thanks, Leslie. Thanks, everybody.
Representative Orwell.
Thank you. I didn't know if Chris wanted to do any response before I jumped in or not.
No, thank you for the opportunity. I agree that a formal exposure assessment would give us more information and address some of the issues. And while some of the data are free, the analysis would be a heavy lift. And it is very true that we stuck to the work that was defined within the proviso and invested more resources than we were allocated to do that work. And so while the data are free and available through the EPA, we don't know the limitations of those data, and the analyses that we'd need to do to control and understand for that was just beyond the scope of the task that we were given, particularly within the time frame. I absolutely agree with you that it would be helpful to look at, and I think the UW Move Up team is very interested in helping grad students look at that work. So if funding were made available, there are grad students that could take that on, and that would be a great add. The review process, right? It was a quick timeline for the turnaround of the work, 1 year. And we certainly had toxicologists and specialists within the state do review, and there were a fair number of them. You are correct, we did not ask the EPA to do a review. And I think your cautions about the study and other potential impacts are important for us to keep in mind. So for example, the excess deaths analyses, there are other potential causes. It was very much a baseline community health profile. That study talks about potential health effects from the review of the literature. And then the take-home point from the analysis is that people living within 10 miles of the airport are a vulnerable population. I also just want to add that this is not unique to King County. I think the other piece of the literature review that might get lost is other urban areas internationally are wrestling with these same issues. And so thanks for the careful review and your thoughts. And thanks, Representative Orwell, for a chance to weigh in.
Well, one, I want to thank Steve. I appreciate your leadership. You've taken your role here very seriously and very thoughtfully. And I guess a couple of things that kind of jump out for me is, one, as a public official, and I think anyone who is, seeing those health outcomes is shocking, and it just speaks to my heart that we have to see what we can do to impact that people are suffering. The second thing it kind of hits me is that further expansion at CACC may only exacerbate what we're already seeing. And I agree that more research is done, and I'm really excited about the partnership. We need the Port and the FAA and King County and everyone to work together, and I think that's a great thing. The last thing that kind of jumped out for me is the need for a green site, and one that's not as in an area that's as heavily populated, and that hopefully is something we can reflect on as a group as we hear about options. So anyway, I appreciate this dialogue and everyone that's here today, and I do want to actually do a shout out for the Port, because they have been working on nighttime hours, and that is huge, right? We all know we need a good night's sleep, and so I want to say thank you for that. I know I had a conversation with General Shen from Taiwan, and my understanding is that 2 a.m. flight that we all hear all the time may change. And so again, I want to say thank you for the work you are doing, and we need you as a partner. Thanks.
Warren, did you have something for the group?
I do, yes. For those that don't know me, I am Warren Hendrickson. I serve as the vice chair of the commission. I am the airport manager for the Port of Bremerton, but I serve the commission as the vice president of the Washington State Aviation Alliance. I am a non-voting member. So I want to also thank the speakers here this last 90 minutes for an incredibly eloquent, well-stated, and quite sobering group of information. Extremely well done and highly topical to exactly the points that we as a commission must address. Steve, you had on your last slide, you actually had 3 items up there that you offered to the commission as particularly available, perhaps as a motion to how to include. Let me just go ahead and put this on the table to address it as a body with one caveat is, of course, the commission members are made of both voting and non-voting members. The voting requirement, typically, as we have done in past practice and past meetings, has been really when we actually get to the final recommendations per the legislative guidance. And up until this point and going forward is that it has always been a consensus of both any action internal to the commission would be a combination of all commission members, whether voting or non-voting. So given that, as a non-voting member myself and being sensitive to that, I would simply offer this in terms of your 3 bullet points. The first 2 bullet points, I think, are, well, to put it in slang language, slam dunks for the most part. I would offer this with regard to the first bullet in terms of specifics, and I will put this in the form of a motion just so that we can get a second and some discussion and see if there's some consensus. But with regard to how to place the public health in there, looking at the environmental responsibility guiding principle, we actually in the first sentence state that it's defined as the responsible interaction with the environment to avoid depletion or degradation of natural resources and allow for long-term environmental quality. I would simply amend the last portion of that particular principle of that first sentence to say, allow for long-term environmental quality and public health. And I think that would more than qualify, and address the importance of this public health issue with regard to that environmental responsibility. I personally don't see it fitting as well within the social equity, not to diminish it in any way, but given that the social equity piece talks about opportunity, livelihood, and participation, I'm not so sure that the public health piece fits it as well in that. But the fact that we address it purely in the environmental responsibility, I think will elevate it to a high level to the benefit of the entire commission and our work. With regard to your second bullet, I would say that, yes, indeed, that what we need to do there is simply include the report as part of the body of evidence that the commission has in its archives for active consideration. Lastly, the third bullet, I think might require additional discussion in terms of what experts, what would be the scope of work, what would we be doing. I think it's something we need to be mindful of, but I think I would just kind of remain mindful of it and table it for now. So essentially my motion amounts to, let's add the public health statement at the end of the first sentence of environmental responsibility, leave that sufficient, add the report to our archives, and that would be my motion before the body.
So before we go to a motion, Larry, can you make your comments?
Thank you, David, and good morning, everyone. Please take me back to the previous motion because I believe there's 2 motions now. The previous motion that was made by Mr. Edmiston. Now there's a second motion that's been
That's
made
correct.
by Mr.
Rob,
Henry.
can you bring up that slide with the recommendations on it? Go ahead, Larry.
We have not voted on the first motion, correct?
No, we've not.
I move to table that.
Okay, so now we essentially have a third motion then.
No, you had a motion from Mr. Edmiston that hasn't been seconded or voted on. And I've moved to table that motion. And that's an up and down vote.
Okay. Any other comments, Larry?
Yes, and I would also move to table Mr. Hendrickson's motion as well. My concerns around all of this are that we are going to go through a very thorough and prescribed, ultimately, EIS process that's defined in federal regulation. And I'm concerned about modifying definitions around any of these items until we have an opportunity to assess the suitability of doing that against the requirements of what the EIS regulations prescribe. Because in the end, we have to make sure that if we expect to receive federal funding for the development of new facilities, we're going to have to follow the federal process. If we start defining processes outside of the federal process, I would be concerned that we would run into a whole host of challenges and problems around that. So I would suggest we might, I'm not saying that these things are inappropriate in any way. They're very thoughtful, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, I think we need to look at that in the context of following the EIS definitions to make sure that we stay on track with how we're supposed to properly carry out our requirements ultimately under federal law.
I think that's a good point, and it kind of gets to my recommendation in that because we do not have all of the members here and some have already dropped off to attend other meetings, the WSDOT staff could go back and consult with the FAA, and then, as we've done before, get this recommended action out to all of the commission members so that all of the voting and non-voting members have a chance to weigh in on it. And we will put, inside of that information that we've received back from the FAA. I agree. I'm not opposed to what's being stated as well, but I do agree with what Larry is saying. Representative Dent, sir, I saw you had your hand up. Representative Dent?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
So, no, Larry handled my question that I had. I was just concerned of having two motions on the floor.
Okay, thank you. And I think Bryce and then Warren, and then we'll go back to Steve.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to make sure that when we're done, we're clarifying what's going to happen. I follow this pretty good. I do a lot of this. I am slightly lost at where we are and what we're trying to achieve right now. And so we just need to make sure that before this is over, we actually know, because I've heard three motions apparently. Two of them were similar. One of them was just tabling everything. And I just want to make sure that by the end of it, we have clarity, because I think especially the first two seem pretty straightforward. There's going to be other reports that should be added to this, I'm guessing. And I think the third one probably is good, but we need to have some of the conversation on what that looks like and what we can achieve. Again, having experts and other folks come in to advise us on stuff that we might not be experts on is going to be helpful for me and my organization at the end of the day. Again, clarity purposes on what it's going to change and what it might not change, because it sounds like the first two aren't going to change much. And then the final piece is, how does the discussion actually occur? Because right now we have three different motions and I don't know what we're trying to discuss.
Well taken. Thanks, Bryce. And I would add that the third recommendation could require funding. So that could be something that's going to be taken in consideration. Warren, did you have something else?
Yes, I did. Just a clarification point. Correct me, Steve, when you retake the floor. My impression was that in this last slide that is still on display, that you're offering that to the body of the commission if somebody wanted to act upon it. I did not take your presentation as actually making the motion. If that was an error, then I overstepped. And I certainly understand that, but that was my thought, was that you were offering it out to the body of the commission, and therefore I was under the impression that my motion was the only motion on the floor, but we can clarify that. The second point, to address Mr. Crowder's comments, is I totally agree that there is an entire federal component to this in terms of the EIS, but that will come in terms of the actual implementation of a site and moving forward with that under very strict guidance and regulation. And there's going to be certain principles and requirements that will have to be met through that. I'm not so sure that that EIS part actually has an immediate impact in terms of the CACC role. We have to be mindful of it, but it doesn't actually enter into the commission's recommendation as I read it. I see that that EIS piece of it will occur after the recommendation is done, and we then move from the CAC's recommendation to legislative action, federal action, and actual implementation of whatever the CAC recommends. So therefore, I don't see the harm in adding a public health component based upon the information we have here. And I think it does in terms of community awareness and public awareness. I think it elevates the probably the awareness of the commission that this is an important component, and speaks to that in a favorable way. So those are the two comments I wanted to make with regard to EIS and then how many motions were on the floor. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah Kaiser.
Thank you, David. First of all, I don't think we have a second on any of the motions, so really they're not actionable in a parliamentary procedure kind of way. But I would also say that the EIS federal component has really nothing to do with the guiding principles of the CACC. Our guiding principles are set by this commission and not set by federal parameters. So I would agree that adding public health to our guiding principles would be of value to our state and a benefit to the public benefit part of the mission we have. I do not think we have to take that action today. I think a full discussion is in order with all members, and I'm fine with sending this out to all members, but I strongly would not want to defer to the FAA because they have been derelict on this issue for decades, and I would not defer to them on the issue of public health. I think that's something for the state to decide, not the feds.
No argument for me on that point, Senator Kaiser. Steve.
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, I can't tell you how much I appreciate a robust discussion on something like this. It's so important to our communities and our process, and we need to have this back and forth. I want to, though, gently but firmly push back on the notion of tabling something that might be as simple as recognizing that the work performed by Public Health Seattle-King County for the state of Washington pursuant to a mandate should be something that is in our quiver of resources that we will take into account. I think the first two bullets, and yes, and I apologize for being inartful. I meant to make a motion, and because it's so awkward on Zoom, I'm not sure we wouldn't get a second if we asked for one and paused for a moment. So I think sometimes it's a little unclear in this process if we would get a second on a motion. But I think those first two bullets are really appropriate. And the reason I don't want to wait, I don't think we should wait, is the public is watching. We only meet once every quarter. And in this quarter, in this meeting, we have already defined dozens and potentially hundreds of things that will happen in the next 3 months by the time we do our public outreach, the system planning that we're about to talk about. We are, the horse is out of the barn, and deciding 3 months from now that it turns out public health was critical in that process could well be too late. I suggest that and I understand that maybe not all of our members are here, but darn it, we meet once a quarter. We need to do business. And I'm going to ask that, and my last bullet starts with the word consider. So we aren't going to make a decision on that point, but it's consider retaining the experts. And that I think can be taken as an instruction to our staff to explore that over the next 3 months or within the next 3 months. So I guess I'm going to ask on the record here that we see if there's a second to this motion. If there is, we can have discussion and resolve it, or we can choose to table it.
Is there a second for the motion? And Steve, can you please specify exactly what your motion is? And does it take into consideration what input from Warren?
Very good question. I would absolutely accept as a friendly amendment to the motion the specific insertion of public health in the section of our guiding principles suggested by the senator. Thank you.
Do I have a second?
This is Bryce. I want a second. I'm just, again, process-wise, we have a few motions, and I can't remember Robert's rules. You know, it's a consideration for that third one. That's great. The amendment is taken on the first one. That's great. I think these are all good suggestions and something we support. I just don't want to get bogged down in process, and I second it. I just want to make sure it's in the right order at this point.
Sure. So the motion before us right now is to take Steve's recommendation and amend under environmental responsibility to add public health after environmental responsibility, and to adopt the studies into the CACC analysis.
Okay, I second that, and I think it would be, I'll stop there and I can add my comments afterward.
Any discussion?
This is Warren. Given the amendment to the motion, I will withdraw my motion from consideration because Steve's motion now is the applicable one and meets the intent and objective of what I was trying to do.
Okay, thanks, Warren.
If I could just ask for clarification, since this is a consensus vote, is there any issue with quorum here?
Rob, you need to speak up a little bit.
Is there any issue with quorum here? Do we have the right number of members present?
Well, based on the fact that the official vote is used primarily for the final recommendations, we're going to use the majority of members present to act on this.
David, one more time.
Go ahead, Larry.
Thank you so much. I'm really not sure. We'll have to probably research this unless someone is really great at parliamentary procedure that's currently in the meeting. But with regard to the fact that we had motion that was offered, we had two motions that were offered with no seconds before my motion to table was offered. I believe my motion to table is something that has to be voted on before the other motions. There's no second required for a motion to table, I believe, and the motion to table is just a simple up and down vote. So if you decide, since
that is correct.
Okay, thank you. So I would suggest that we would need to vote on the motion to table Mr. Edmiston's motion, and since Mr. Hendrickson withdrew his motion, I think we would only have to have one vote on my motion to table.
Okay, so in order to do this, I think what we're going to need to do is have let's do that.
This is Bryce, and again, I'm going to just throw some more process questions because this is getting kind of out of hand. It sounded like originally Steve said, I'm willing to do that if this is the appropriate time without ever making a motion. So it kind of sounds like we're tabling something that didn't exist, and then he made another motion that has since not, and so this is where the process confusion comes in. I don't know if we need to start from the beginning. I'm happy to vote as many times as we want, but if we're going to really follow the Roberts rules here, we're getting kind of process heavy, and I don't think that was the intent of this request, nor what the intent of this body is supposed to be doing today.
Well, I would like to respond to that, if I could, David.
Go ahead, Mike.
I was not aware that we were going to be voting on any of these things today.
No, it was not planned. I think this is what
Precisely, and that's another part of my concern.
Jane, you have a comment?
Yeah, I think just to follow on with Larry's comments, I think, the information, Steve, fantastic job just, with your presentation. It's great to hear that community perspective, and also to the studies that were presented here. I will say that, they were enlightening and certainly concerning, and something that I think we all want to consider and take into consideration as we think about the work we have to do. A little bit, I just agree with Larry that this is new to me, at least in terms of the study and the information. And I think it's worth us considering what is the right way to incorporate that study and these concerns into our process. And so I think it is worthy of tabling it. I would suggest that we put it on the agenda for the next meeting and make it a formal agenda item and have a vote on it. And to Larry's point, we really weren't considering a vote at this time, but I think it's incredibly enlightening information. It's just, it seems premature to say, is this the exact perfect way that we need to address the new information presented to us in our guiding principles?
Thanks, Stephen. That's a great comment. Let me ask this, is there any opposition to us taking all of this information and getting it back out to commission members like we've done before to get input from individual commissions, and then decide whether or not we actually want to push it to the next meeting or take action on it before to get everyone's input? And I know Steve's feelings on it. He would rather decide on this today. Sarah Kaiser.
I would just say that the other members who are not here today did not see the presentation, did not have the opportunity to consider its implications. So it would be helpful perhaps if we're going to wait, to make sure that they have the full impact of that information. Personally, I would like to take action on the amended motion that is before us from Steve, having to simply add public health to our environmental responsibility, because it would be something commonsensical in many cases, especially with the evidence we have. So personally, I would rather not put that small step off.
I don't disagree. Steve.
Well, I think the problem I see that is just so practical is, okay, if we're going to put off including public health and this report in our work for up to 3 months, are we putting off how that impacts the work we want to do in the next 3 months? And I am concerned about that very much, simply because of the way this commission sort of has to, because of the times we live in, grind forward, on a every 3 month basis. And if we want to take 3 months to decide that public health is significant and needs to be part of what we do, and that study is something that we want to rely upon to make our decision, we can do that, but I become increasingly uncomfortable when in that 3 month period, I get a bunch of information that didn't use that, as a guiding principle. So I think we have a chicken or the egg or, problem here. And I think that the subject matter of the motion is so simple. I'm just hopeful that we can agree that the work by public health belongs as part of our commission work.
Thanks, Steve. Mark?
So David, I'd like to call for a vote on the table motion.
Okay, so I think what we're either gonna have to do is, Larry, you either have to keep your motion on the table or withdraw it. And we could move to Senator Kaiser's recommendation, but if you want to keep it, we'll go ahead and proceed with the call for whether or not we table it.
I'd like to keep the motion active, David. Thank you.
Okay, so because we're doing this online, it's difficult to track. Can we get Terry? Are you with us right now?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so what I'd like to have is those that are in favor of tabling the motion, please say so now individually. Larry, I think we have your vote.
Aye.
Okay.
Any others that are asking to table?
This is Jim Coons. I support Larry Crowder's motion.
We have Larry and Jim to table.
David, this is Arif. I think at this point it'd be wise to table until we can get more information out to the entire membership and they can all absorb the information.
Larry, Jim, and Arif. Any others?
Just per my previous comments, I agree to table at this time and consider the absolutely need and appropriate way to include public health in our work.
Okay, thanks, Shane. We have 4 to table.
David, this is Joe Bram. I agree to table as well.
Joe agrees to table. Tony, can you clarify that you're voting to table? Okay, Tony Bean also has voted to table.
This is Rudy, voting to table.
Thank you, Rudy.
This is Stroud Kunkel. I'm voting to table.
Thank you, Stroud. That's 8 members to table. Others? Tara, can you tell the total members that we currently have present right now?
I'm not sure who is present without going through all of the lists, but we have voting and non-voting total of 25 members.
Okay, I am scrolling down the list right now.
We have a hand from Robert Rodriguez.
Robert?
Yes, it's Robert. I'd vote to table.
That's 9. Thank you, Robert.
I would suggest, David, that we simply do a roll call of the people present and ask if they are for or against tabling. That might be the most efficient way to proceed.
Yeah, Terry has the roll. Terry, can you bring it up, please?
Yes. Eric Fitch for Jeffrey Brown.
Voting aye.
Table?
Yes.
Steve Edmiston.
Votes no.
Mark Inglesian.
The vote is no.
David Fleckenstein.
No.
Arif Gauss.
Yes.
Andrea Goodpasture, I believe, has had to step off. Spencer Hansen. Shane Jones.
Yes.
Larry Crowder.
Yes.
Stroud Kunkel.
Yes.
Jim Coons.
Yes.
Robin Toth.
No.
Bryce Yaden.
No.
Tony Bean. Yes, was his response in the chat box. Lois Ballenbeck.
Yes.
Representative Dent.
Representative Dent votes yes.
Warren Hendrickson.
No.
Robert Hodgman.
Abstain.
Senator Honeyford.
I believe Senator Honeyford had to drop off early.
Thank you. Senator Kaiser.
Votes no.
Representative Orwell.
Votes no.
Robert Rodriguez. Robert Rodriguez.
I vote no.
Thank you. Rudy Rudolph.
Yes.
Jason Thibodeau.
Point of clarification, it's my understanding that PSRC has a non-voting seat.
That is correct. We are asking all members if you want to table this discussion.
I would vote yes.
Carrie Wohler.
I vote no.
Thank you. Give me just a moment.
The tally is 11 voting to table, 10 voting to not table, with 1 abstention.
Yes.
Okay, so we will table this motion, but with that being said, I will carry on with what I had recommended. The WSDOT staff will put all this together. We will get it back out to the members. And what I hope to achieve is we have some resolution prior to coming to a next meeting. I agree with Steve. I don't think this needs to be moved to a next meeting, but I do want everyone to try and make an informed decision on this. So with that, thank you, everyone. I know that was a little bit of a painful process. And Steve, thank you for your comments and bringing this to the table, because again, it's one of the most important things that we're doing right now. So as we move forward, this next presentation that we have is a quick 12-minute video. We're going to show this video and then we're going to go to lunch. But this is all about some of the things we've been talking about this morning. We're taking 12 minutes out of a PBS presentation called The Great Electric Airplane Race. It does talk about the future of aviation, but the most important thing and the takeaway from this is that there have been similar studies done, and this one was done at Logan International Airport in Boston. So if Rob can make this work for us, we're going to show this, and then we're going to take a break after that.
The race is on to stop the climate emergency.
We're seeing more and more people really paying attention to their carbon footprint.
Aviation is a fast-growing offender. But is it too slow to respond?
Aviation will become the final dinosaur that doesn't clean up if we don't act right now.
It's the high-hanging fruit, one of the hardest climate challenges of all.
It's extremely difficult to get rid of the fuel if you want to transport tons and tons of passengers.
Could rapid progress in electric technology change the equation?
Electric motors are at a certain point today. The battery systems are at a certain point today. We're within that edge of possible.
New technology is driving a global race to push that edge.
This might sound crazy, but we believe that's the future of transportation for everybody.
A new era may be closer than you think.
Are we flying the future right now?
We absolutely are.
The great electric airplane race is cleared for takeoff right now on Nova. All right. Wendy, this your first day flying?
Actually, yeah, that's my first flight.
Yeah. A trip to the airport in Watsonville, California, shrouded in mystery. I've been invited here by a publicity-shy company. For a flight to an undisclosed location to see a groundbreaking new flying machine. Beyond that, details are sketchy. Our pilot is Wendy Kraft.
You've been flying helicopters for a long time. Is this the kind of thing you'd like to share with many more people, that ability to go anywhere, anytime?
Oh, absolutely, especially in this area. I mean, having grown up in Santa Cruz, there wasn't really a traffic problem back in the day. But now, traffic is horrendous.
Helicopters are only for the lucky few. It's about $1,000 an hour to operate this one. And of course, they're noisy. We fly for an hour, and then, without warning, there it is, sitting on a remote airstrip, a successor to the helicopter, an aircraft that flies without a drop of fossil fuel, part of an electric revolution in flight. One with the ambitious goal of democratizing the rare privilege we just enjoyed. And maybe, just maybe, help save the planet. The climate emergency is here and now. The greenhouse gas carbon dioxide is at the highest level it's been in at least 800,000 years. It's an existential crisis that is prompting action. Globally, about 15% of the human carbon footprint comes from transportation. We see some signs of progress. Electric car sales are rising as prices drop.
We're seeing more and more people really paying attention to their carbon footprint.
But aviation, it's one of the hardest transportation problems to solve. Yet all over the world, engineers, entrepreneurs, and aviators are trying to meet the challenge.
We believe it's going to happen sooner than most people imagine. If you fly on small commuter airlines today, you can expect some version of electric aircraft within the next 5 years.
Today it's hard to see, but it may just be a matter of time. Because electric motors are so small, yet powerful and responsive, designers can distribute them all over an aircraft and replace control surfaces like ailerons, stabilizers, and rudders. The motors reduce drag and are much more efficient. They are experimenting, starting small, creating some flying machines like never seen before. There's even more at stake than the climate emergency. Aviation has a serious pollution problem that is just now coming into focus. Just after dawn on a sunny, blustery October morning in Boston, a pair of scientists are chartering a fishing boat.
So we can definitely try to get as close to the runway as possible.
But environmental engineers Nilakshi Huda and John Durant of Tufts University,
How much closer do you want to get? Another 100 meters?
are casting
This might be a good spot, might be a great spot.
for plumes of emissions generated by aircraft heading into Logan Airport. Combustion of Jet A fuel in airplane engines is a bigger piece of the overall pollution pie than most people recognize.
The amount of Jet A that's consumed at Logan is about 25% of all the fuel that's consumed in the city of Boston by all the cars. And there are millions of people that live around big, large airports that are impacted by these emissions day in and day out. And it's a chronic insult, environmental insult to those communities.
They're out to answer a simple question. How pervasive is that chronic insult?
Basically, we are seeing a plume downwind from the plane, which results in a spike in the concentrations that we are measuring.
They are measuring the quantity and the size of toxic particles, the remnants of incomplete combustion.
Average size 10 nanometers, that's really small particles. The smaller the particle it is, the deeper it can penetrate in your lungs. They have been associated with a slew of cardiovascular health effects, respiratory health effects, elevation in blood pressure, systemic inflammation, and have the capacity to actually penetrate the blood-brain barrier directly and deposit in human brain.
Huda has an electric car outfitted with similar equipment.
So here's a size distribution.
She drives through neighborhoods under the flight paths, continuously gathering data. Her pioneering work began in Los Angeles in 2012. Driving a similarly equipped car, she systematically traversed the neighborhoods beneath the final approach paths to Los Angeles International Airport. She was able to identify a distinct plume from the airplanes that went much farther than she expected.
We went 20 kilometers, and I still don't think that's the end of it. I just ran out of battery at that point in my car. No one had suspected that they'd find a really clean signal 20 kilometers downwind of an airport. If you look at the top 23 airports, about 10% of US population lives within 10 miles of those airports. We all benefit from aviation, but we all don't really pay for it equally.
And yet we all pay a price for aviation's impact on the climate emergency. Before the pandemic, aviation accounted for about 3.5% of the world's climate warming problem. About 2/3 of jet fuel exhaust is CO2. Less than 1% are nitrogen oxides, which also cause warming. The other third is mostly water vapor, which at high altitude becomes ice crystals, contrails. When the humidity is right, contrails spread and linger for hours, creating cirrus clouds. Thousands of flights creating thousands of contrail-induced clouds trap a lot of heat. They have about twice the impact on global warming as the CO2 from jet exhaust. And the problem is getting worse. Global aviation is growing rapidly. It is predicted to double in less than 20 years. In stark contrast, other forms of transport are investing heavily in green alternatives.
If that trend continues, then aviation is going to become one of the top polluters of all industry sectors. Aviation will become the final dinosaur that doesn't clean up if we don't act right now.
It's a weighty issue, specifically the weight of jet fuel. A Boeing 737 can hold more than 40,000 pounds of it. Sounds like a lot. But to replace the jet engines with electric motors, you would need 30 times the weight or about 1.2 million pounds of batteries to get comparable range. Solving that engineering challenge will be daunting, but the first baby steps have already been taken. In 2003, Bertrand Piccard co-founded the Solar Impulse project in Switzerland. The goal? To design and build a solar electric aircraft that could fly around the world.
For Solar Impulse, we had to make a very, very light airplane. The weight of a car. We were flying at the speed of a moped and transporting one pilot and 0 passengers. And like this, we could fly solar with electric engines.
May we lift off? His partner in the audacious endeavor was Andrei Borschberg.
I had faith in the possibility to do it, but of course I didn't know how. Could we collect enough energy? And could we use so little that it would make the flight through the night possible?
In the end, it took 16 months, but they did circumnavigate the planet.
We made it! What I wanted to do was to show that electric aviation had also a future and that the technologies already exist. It's not something that we can do in 100 years. We can do it now, and actually we did it. Today, all the people who say a clean aviation is impossible will look as stupid as the one who said to the Wright brothers, your airplane will never fly.
Thanks, Rob. Again, the intent for this was to kind of highlight that there are other studies similar to what we've been struggling with being conducted in other parts of the country. We are going to talk about the future of aviation after we take a quick 15-minute break. So at 12:15, we will start again and hope to conclude on time. Thank you all. See you at 12:15. All right, it's 12:15, and we're going to get started with this afternoon's portion of the commission's meeting. Before we get into the bulk of the next session, I'm going to ask Joe Bram to let us know for the record whether or not he was voting in favor of tabling the motion or not. He was inadvertently left off of the roll call. So, Joe?
Thanks, David. My vote was yes to table.
Okay, so that does not change the outcome of the motion. That makes it 12-10 to table. Thanks, Joe, for clarifying that for the record. So as we get started this afternoon, I do hope everybody had a chance to get a little bit of lunch. We're going to start off with a quick synopsis on the Advanced Air Mobility and Sustainable Aviation Strategy document that WASDOT staff put together since our last meeting. This is primarily informational to let you know about some of the other work that WASDOT is conducting that has ties to the CACC's work, especially when it comes to addressing environmental responsibility. Depending on whose definition you're looking at, advanced air mobility can include everything from battery-powered electric aircraft to hydrogen-propelled aircraft and even hypersonic aircraft. In 2016, there were only 6 known advanced air mobility designs that kind of fell into that category, and by 2020, there were over 450 designs. The AAM market is estimated to reach around 115 billion annually by 2035, employing more than 280,000 family wage jobs. For our aviation system, the work to increase aviation capacity and all of the opportunities that go along with it, it's important that we set the conditions for advanced air mobility, or AAM, and in doing so, we can also pave the way for a more sustainable aviation system. Part of this strategy includes a shift from what was called the initial proposed 6 beta test airports as identified in the electric aircraft feasibility study that was conducted to what is now referred to as the Washington Sustainable Aviation Partner Airports. This was in part due to interest from other airports that wanted to be included in the work. As part of the condition setting, we have included policy, planning, and funding initiatives that could be included in a roadmap moving forward. The strategy also incorporates both the expanded use of sustainable aviation fuel for aircraft flying today and the zero to near zero emissions aircraft in development for tomorrow. Our near-term recommendation is for airports and communities to begin conducting the basic level planning required to identify things such as electric aircraft charging facilities on airport layout plans and the infrastructure required, while also considering things such as vertiport locations and the connections to other modes of transportation. Next year, WSDOT is going to begin allocating 10% of our available state grant funds to airports through the aeronautics account to sustainability projects at airports. This is a relatively small amount, but we hope to build on it. The FAA is providing additional funding for the electrification of airports, and there have been several additional initiatives proposed to Congress. For the CACC consideration, I think these ideas should be a part of what we consider for recommendations that move forward in 2023 to legislators. The Aviation System Plan, which Rob is about to talk about, will include a robust look at sustainability from our consultants. And as with technology, what we know today will likely be very different just a couple of years from now. So we have to take into consideration, again, we're looking at capacity years in the future. And I think we have a responsibility, especially based on what we heard about this morning, to set the conditions for a more sustainable aviation system. With that being said, I'll pass it over to Rob, and then I'll take some questions if there are any on this strategy document later. Rob.
Thank you, David. So as previously mentioned, WSDOT Aviation will be obtaining an in-depth technical analysis as part of the upcoming Aviation System Plan with the benefit of a highly skilled consultant team. Scheduled to commence later this year. The next few slides, I'm going to try to explain the connection between the Commission and the Aviation System Plan. But first, I want to start by revisiting, where we started, the legislative direction. And notwithstanding Steve's mention this morning, which is also in the legislation, this is really targeted on what the deliverables are that the Commission has been tasked to provide. And so you can see the italicized text on the right. And on the left, we've kind of condensed that down into two primary objectives, and that is to recommend a new primary commercial aviation facility and to recommend possible additional facility needs or expansion of existing facilities to meet anticipated demand. We also wanted to clarify the roles of the system plan as relates to the CACC's work. The system plan is a technical analysis. The consultant team will be made up of planners and engineers. Their role is to conduct in-depth technical analysis and develop options, but they will not make decisions. That role belongs to the Commission. And it is the CACC's communications consultant, PRR, you heard from Lindsay earlier today, that will both reach out to the public to share CACC considerations and to receive input from the public on behalf of the Commission. As you know from your time serving on the Commission or following the Commission's work, there is a lot to consider as we have worked to define the details of the problem and develop possible concepts to solve it. We have learned things we didn't know that we now recognize will have bearing on the solution. So what are we solving for? Well, it's aviation capacity, but what type of aviation capacity? Passenger service, air cargo, and general aviation each have different needs. And this is a great opportunity to define that. I think we've kind of talked about it over the past meetings, but I want to try and condense it here. Air cargo is primarily concentrated in the Seattle urban area, and the reason for that is all of the air cargo, or almost all of the air cargo, whether it's cargo in the belly of a passenger aircraft, whether it's an all freight aircraft, or it's something along the lines of the expediters, which are actually all freight, mostly small package like UPS, FedEx, DHL, and Amazon Prime, all fly large airplanes into a highly populated area where the infrastructure is in place to be able to then disperse that freight out to across the region. So the air cargo activity needs to be concentrated in the greater Seattle metropolitan area. Compare that to passengers. Now we're looking at the Puget Sound area because we have communities throughout the Puget Sound region where potential passengers will want to get on an airplane. And so one of the considerations is travel time to get to an airport. And so we're recognizing that solving for passenger travel is a little bit different than solving for air cargo travel. And finally, general aviation, we've shared with you in previous meetings not only the information gained from the previous aviation system plan as relates to general aviation aircraft storage, but about a year ago we did a survey which we shared with you for both airports and pilots, GA pilots, regarding aviation capacity, specifically aircraft storage, and we recognize that that demand really is a statewide demand. We have also heard from the public, as Lindsay relayed to you earlier, and we are seeing some significant changes in aviation technology that have the potential to provide innovative solutions, as David just portrayed and as you saw in the video. And then there's the pandemic, which keeps rolling along. So what we've heard, and you kind of heard this morning from Lindsay, is the negative environmental and health impacts as a result of commercial aviation and increasing support for social equity. The technological advances, we recognize that there's still some work to be done there, but as you saw from the video, and I encourage you, when these slides come out, there will be a link on the slides that you can watch the entire video. It's pretty fascinating stuff what the potential is to provide here. As a result, we have come to realize that the Commission could benefit from revisiting our approach. And so we've had some observations. We understand the interaction between capacity needs and various different types of activity that probably we can't solve the problem with one single site. We also recognize that although we agreed we were going to pursue either a new large airport or expanding existing airports, or perhaps both, and I think that's what the Commission reached a consensus, our current analysis indicates that it's going to be a very complex problem using that framework to solve. And of course, the adverse environmental and health impacts from aviation are a lot more harmful than we originally understood when we started this work. In addition, current aviation technology is highly dependent upon fossil fuels. And what I mean by that is that as aircraft from the Boeing manufacturing facility roll off the assembly line, those airplanes are likely to be in the fleet for 20 to 30 years. And although we anticipate some improvements in engines to be able to burn sustainable aviation fuels, and certainly that's something that we want to move towards, we recognize that there is likely to be some combustion engines in the inventory for quite some time. And finally, emerging aviation technology, as we've already discussed, has tremendous potential to not only reduce harmful environmental impacts, to reduce travel costs, but also to make travel and air transportation for shippers more accessible. And so we believe that there's a real opportunity here for the Commission to take advantage of this and work this into the solutions. So how do these observations factor into the next phase? We have a proposed refinement of the approach. And I'll pass it off to Rita to talk briefly about that.
Okay. And before we do that, I was wondering if any of the commissioners have questions about the information that Rob just presented, or any additional observations. Larry Crowder. Larry?
Thank you, Rita. Rob, could you please go back to, I think it's 2 slides back for a moment? Thank you. What is the basis for the statement about harmful environmental impacts in the context of the discussion here?
Well, I think, you know,
why did we pick the word harmful?
Thank you. I appreciate that question. Well, not only from the presentations this morning, but those of you who were able to participate, about a year ago when Professor Larson from the University of Washington presented the first round of the Move Up, we recognized the implications there. We went into a little bit more detail in that presentation about understanding that as airplanes arrive, that is really where the concerns are. And although, you know, things have not been completely proven as some aspects, as you heard from the experts, which I am not, earlier today, we recognize that there's enough evidence that we need to consider commercial aviation as having harmful impacts.
Other questions or observations from the commission?
Rita, just a follow-up to that. I'd like to see the sites for what you're using there, Rob. I think that, again, if you could go back to that slide for a second, I think the issue in terms of what we're trying to accomplish with regard to solving the problem we've been charged with, which is how to address airport capacity needs in the region. I want to make sure that we are focused on what our obligations are to mitigate identified environmental impacts associated with any given scenario that we may recommend. I'm concerned about statements like this with regard to managing expectations about what we're supposed to do. And so I would just say we want to choose our words carefully around the traditional procedures that have to be followed when we're citing aviation facilities. And this does not, in my view, speak to that.
Well, thanks, Larry. And let me see if I can clarify if I understand what you're asking. So, and I'll refer back to the presentation we had from FAA many months ago regarding the environmental analysis that's required as part of the FAA process. And one of the reasons that we asked the FAA to present is because we wanted to clarify what the CACC's role is and what it is not. And so we understand, and as you've mentioned earlier in the meeting today, the importance of the federal process, and we're certainly not trying to get in the way of that. But we also recognize that we're doing some preliminary analysis to try to understand various different sites and what the potential impacts across the spectrum of environmental impacts could be. And as has been previously mentioned, relating to a greenfield site, we understand that certainly less populated areas are more desirable. But I think the commission understands that to try to find a location like that in Western Washington is a real challenge. And so hopefully I'm answering your question that we're certainly not trying to supersede the federal process.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Rob. I think, though, that the way that we might want to frame that discussion is a little bit differently, which is that emerging aviation technology will actually make it easier to expand the current system or to develop new facilities because of their cleaner nature, right? I think if we're looking at it that way, I think that that's a more appropriate way to frame how we might want to consider the emerging benefits, of new technology. So I would just prefer that we always frame it in how it enables us to accomplish our mission. And it doesn't become the mission in and of itself. And that's what I'm a little bit concerned about here.
Again.
So I want to keep taking us back to why we're here, what we're trying to do, the process around it, and the fact that, again, emerging aviation technology will help enable us to be able to accomplish the mission of adding capacity to the system. So I just want to make sure that we're, everybody is framing it in that way so that we don't get distracted by this becoming, upside down in terms of what we're trying to accomplish in our mission.
Let me add something to that. I don't think it's going to. We have a responsibility. It's laid out in the legislation that we have to be cognizant of the impacts to the environment of the recommendations that this group might make. And so, looking at future technology is a way of being conscious with that and injecting that into the plan so that what we achieve at the end doesn't take away from what we were tasked to do, but it's a path that gets us there in a much better light, considering the impacts on the environment. And I see that Bryce has a question, so let's go to Bryce real quickly so he can comment as well. Bryce.
Thanks. I think I was just going to kind of say that the current language seems sound, especially based off of what you just said. So I appreciate that, bringing it back that we are supposed to talk about the environment and look and not just mitigate, but lessen and make sure that we're not increasing environmental impact and then trying to mitigate that. And I think it's something I want to talk about at the round robin this afternoon that I've been, contemplating. So hopefully we can get to that. But the idea that aviation doesn't have any environmental impacts and that we only have to look at the positive of aviation kind of ignores the fact that we don't take into account greenhouse gas emissions in our NEPA standards currently. SEPA does, and we do that on a larger basis. So I think that we need to make sure that, we know that aviation fuels increase greenhouse gas emissions and increase the threat of severe weather storms due to climate change. So again, I think we're arguing semantics on something that is well known and is factual. And I think that we can keep moving on instead of always saying that airports are good. I think they serve a great purpose. I'm not trying to stop it. I just think that we need to move on and figure out what we're trying to do.
Yeah, let me jump back in. So these set of slides are all kind of framing that we're going to we think we may need to add a little bit to our approach, and it's really part and parcel of exactly what Larry's talking about. We recognize the potential of emerging technology and the potential for it to provide a lot of really great solutions. You can see it right kind of there in the last bullet. Reduction or elimination of environmental impacts, reduce travel costs, dramatically reduce travel costs, and increased access. But anyone who's paying attention to that segment of the industry knows that there's still a lot of work to be done. And so I can tell you that this is one of the big components of the coming aviation system plan is to explore what could we do with integrating emerging technology in order to offset some of these other challenges that we've been talking about most of the morning, and provide these other benefits that are there in the last bullet. So I'm agreeing with you, Larry, and Bryce, I'm also agreeing with you.
And as we move on, I'll just add that Larry's point is well taken. We don't want to veer from the task at hand. How we get to that task, that is going to be up to the commission members.
So the reason for proposing that we think about explicitly refining our focus, these are all things that have been kind of implicit in our prior recommendations. We've talked about having a system-wide strategy, and for purposes of, you know, increasing public understanding about what the nature is of the problem that we need to address, we thought it would be helpful, and we're just asking for concurrence here from this group, that we explicitly say that we are pursuing a system-wide strategy that accomplishes the following thing. One is that it addresses the unique requirements of air passenger, air cargo, and general aviation, because they are quite different. They serve different geographic areas, markets, et cetera. One that requires environmental emissions and noise reduction, elimination strategies be included and addressed in each of the solutions for each of those modes to avoid disproportionate impacts. That our strategy should also look at how we can ensure equitable access to air transportation for underserved regions in the state. And then finally, that the strategy would be developed with an eye toward enhancing economic opportunity for all throughout Washington state. So that's a proposed refinement that we offer to you and ask for your additions to, changes to, and ultimately concurrence on. Larry, were you still wanting to talk, or your hand is up? But I know Senator Kaiser.
Rita, I think I just didn't put it down. Sorry.
Okay, Senator Kaiser. Unmute,
You're muted,
please.
Senator.
Unmute.
Thank you so much, Rita. I'll never get over it. I do want to restate what David said in the beginning of this meeting today, which is, although aviation includes air passenger, air cargo, and general aviation, in terms of our mission, our facilities approach is aimed at commercial aviation for passengers and cargo. Commercial aviation. General aviation has some commercial purposes. Sometimes they carry around some business papers and so forth, but I guess they aren't all of equal weight, and I want to make that clear.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And you're right. That's the toughest part to solve. Those two, the passenger and the air cargo. So thank you, Rita. So to talk a little bit more about the system plan and the interface between the system plan and the commission. Yes.
We're not ready to move on yet. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
I wanted to see if there were any other suggestions for potential changes. I'm hearing one, which is that maybe we clarify that we're talking about commercial air passenger and commercial air cargo. Any other suggestions? Okay, hearing none, we can move forward then, Rob.
All right, thank you. Moving forward. It's all good. Okay, so as I was saying, we really want to kind of drill down a little bit more into the interface between the system plan and the commission, just so that we all are understanding how this is going to go. I showed you the calendar earlier to try and give you the next many months of what that looks like. This is more of the process. So clearly, this is a very complicated endeavor, and we need a lot of technical analysis to develop some of these system-wide scenarios. The Aviation System Plan project, system plans are guided by FAA Advisory Circular and mostly funded by FAA funds. And so it's important that we stick to the framework that is the FAA protocol for aviation system plans. But fortunately, our partners at the region and at Airport District Office understand the importance of this. And as would be our good fortune, a lot of the commission's work fits very well within the existing guidance of the FAA's procedures. So the consultant team will help develop options and opportunities in addition to regular system plan components, which I have on the next slide, and I'll share some of those with you at the high level. But we also are relying on the consultant team to explore in great detail the application of emerging aviation technologies, and the application of environmentally sustainable aviation. So the system plan will provide the Commission details, technical analysis details, and options, but the decision-making, the discussion, and ultimately the recommendations to the legislature will reside with the Commission. So this is a bulleted list. You can see that we've broken this down into 3 categories: documentation and data, market potential, and sustainability. And what I would say is that the documentation and data are those things that are very much common to an aviation system plan, documenting the current situation, forecasts and projections for demand, and recommendations for system improvements. That's straight out of the advisory circular. But in addition to that, as I mentioned, the advisory circular does allow for the potential to, this market potential to do some of this analysis. And so we really want to take a very close look. For example, we've talked a lot about greenfield sites. And as David mentioned, currently we really don't have a viable greenfield site. Something we haven't talked much about, but really ties in with this conversation we just had, which is distributed commercial air passenger service. And so the concept is that we would completely change the way air passenger service happens. Instead of everyone making the trek to a big airport, we have roughly 70 airports in Washington state that have the potential to provide small electric aviation, small commercial passenger service support to communities, which means that many communities across the state would not have to make that long drive to CACC or Spokane or wherever, and could get on a flight at their local general aviation airport, either for within the state travel or for connections to their final destination anywhere in the world that you want to go. So that's a very exciting potential. There's a lot of detailed analysis that we have to do to see if in fact that would actually work in the real world. And then finally, under the market potential, really take a close look at, it's a neat idea to look at these airports, but will passengers and shippers really want to go? Will that be a successful venture? Will the airlines, will the air cargo companies be willing, is there a business case for them to support that? And then you see there at the bottom, sustainability. We've talked a great deal about all of these, and so I won't revisit these. Just to give you a concept, so this is tied to the calendar that I showed you earlier, and you recall that that's just a preliminary concept. The idea that I want to portray to you on this slide is that the scope of work, the calendar will, once refined by the consultant comes on board, will be designed to make sure that commission members have the technical information they need, that you need, in order to be able to make informed decisions. So we've got some examples here. Again, this is just templated of various different deliverables that the system plan would provide to the commission in order to give the commission what you need in order to make those decisions. That's kind of a very high level review of the aviation system plan. And before I pass it off to David to talk about next steps, I want to see if there are any questions or comments about what I presented.
Rob, there were some questions that we were hoping to get commissioner feedback on. They were framed in the agenda. One was just to confirm, for the system plan and for our work, what are the key environmental issues that should be addressed? And we've heard some of them, but it would be good for us to once again say, what are the key environmental issues that need to be addressed in the system plan? Suggestions from the commission. Don't all speak up at once.
Steve?
I turned on my mic, but I moved location, so hopefully I'm still on here.
Yes.
Gosh, that is such an extraordinarily broad question. I'm not sure how to answer that, and I'm not sure it's really a fair question. I mean, I always think of three. Now I moved to where my dog is. Sorry about that. I moved to 3 areas when I think of the environment. I certainly, we have an obligation to consider climate change and the emissions as part of our environment. That's sort of the larger environment. But in our micro environment related to any site that we go to, we're going to talk about all the impacts from aviation operations relating to those communities in that environment and the human environment. So we're going to talk about noise that we talked about today. We're going to talk about pollution that we talked about today, in addition to potentially, purely environmental, non-human environmental impacts. So, gosh, I don't even know how we can begin to sort of make a list here at a commission meeting in response to that question, other than to say, it's a huge list and shouldn't be omitted. I think it should be one of virtually on every page of this plan. We should be addressing how it fits into our analysis. And I'm not sure I'm seeing that. So maybe this is just one of those things that we're considering today and then sort of going to be able to move forward on after our next meeting. Or are we asked to be saying today, is this like a thing that we have to think about moving on today or not moving on today? This shift.
At this point, we're just looking for things we want to make sure that the system plan consultants have top of mind.
In other words, is there something that commission members feel strongly about that they want to see influenced inside of the aviation system plan? And I think you've stated some of those already, Steve, and that is part of the plan. I mean, the document that supports the aviation system plan is quite large in terms of what we're asking the consultants to do.
Bryce?
Yeah, I think, some of the investments mentioned things like climate change. I'm just, in terms of how we do it, and might I be confused? So if these need to be brought up bigger, I can continue to think about it over the next couple weeks and get back. But, things like what are the drivers of VMT, vehicle miles traveled, and stuff like that when we're choosing an airport? What are the, outside of just the aviation impact? And I think I talk about this a lot, but, the knock-on impacts like VMT and air pollution related to vehicle travel. Another thing I've been thinking about is how we're going to measure mitigation versus the absence of the impact altogether. Our environmental laws typically say you can go and move forward with something as long as you're trying your best to mitigate those impacts and get as far to mitigate those impacts as possible. But what is that gap when we can't mitigate those impacts? And what is the environmental gap that we could potentially leave open? I don't know if I'm exactly explaining that correctly, but it's something we've been internally going over on how do we actually account for mitigation and what are the alternatives to mitigation if there is no impact at all. So I think those are a couple of things. I know that I can send additionals if those aren't as detailed or too detailed. And I know my folks are continuing to think about that.
Okay, great, thank you. Larry, I think you were next.
Thank you, Rita. I think that, you always have to consider these things within the context of the federal system as well. So the NIPIAS, National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, as well as what the states are doing. And, probably I think we will be more likely to draw very, broad conclusions. I think as Bryce pointed out, as well as Steve, it's too broad of a question, frankly. You have to kind of look in the context of sustainability because, there are a lot of benefits to pursuing sustainable development of airports. But I do think you probably have to kind of narrow that a bit because in the end, everything kind of boils down to what is going to happen at that specific local airport. And most of the capacity conversations and capacity initiatives are not going to happen outside of the federal context. And so, we find ourselves back inside of the federal environmental process and the things that we have to measure and the things that we have to identify that have to be mitigated. And I would just strike another caution here is that if the state system plan starts recommending policies and other things that go beyond the scope of what airports are, already working on through the federal process, as a policy matter, the state has better start thinking about how they're going to fund that policy. Because right now the state doesn't fund any of these types of things. And so anytime we want to start thinking about additive goals, we better also be thinking of how are we going to pay for those goals, because that's not going to be paid for out of federal AIP funds or possibly PFC funds. And then we also have to think about the market balance to all of these things. And who ultimately pays as well. So I just want to kind of make sure we're balancing that part of the conversation, and recognizing that it is kind of, I think as Steve said, it's kind of a really unfair question to ask us in the broad context of what we're trying to do. But I just think we just need to be careful about what we're saying in the state system plan in terms of its alignment with the federal process, and therefore the alignment with the eligibility for federal funds with regard to the things that we want to do on the go forward. Thanks.
So Rita, let me jump in for just a minute because we kind of got a little bit off course. The intent of these questions was really to kind of talk about some of the things that we had discussed today, not necessarily injecting those into the aviation system plan. There are some very systemic things we have to do as a part of an aviation system plan update that is driven by the FAA, and that gets back to what Larry was just talking about. So again, these comments are really meant to drive discussion regarding some of the things you heard about today. Rudy, you had something, and go ahead, Rudy.
Yeah, thank you. We've kind of in the discussion covered a lot of territory, but I just wanted to offer a thought or a comment. I think obviously in the overall planning process and the scope of what we've been tasked with, we need to be mindful and set out those sidewalls for all of the health effects and environmental sustainability and all of those things. But also remember, we're not in, at least I don't think we're tasked to be in the mitigation business on the front end. That's why you've got the NEPA process and the SEPA process. This is a planning conceptual process we're going through. And, at some point, once a project becomes a reality, then you can start the parallel 20-year third runway analysis for CACC and figure out how it's going to get mitigated. But I don't think that we should put too many constraints on us on the front end. So thank you.
Okay. I think Bryce and Larry, you've already spoken. Shane.
Yeah. Just a comment, not specifically about the environmental requirements, more a little bit just about the system plan. And I think, it's the approach. And I'm just trying to get my head around it because I feel like we have done the work for the viability of existing airports, and that work over the last, 18 months, 2 years. And I thought the focus really was then we know the 6 airports, some of which are for commercial, some not, but then more turning towards greenfield. The emerging technologies are incredibly interesting, and I think there is viability for some of the regional short haul, point to point markets, and with new aircraft that can serve that in a zero emission fashion. I guess I just don't want us to take our eye off the ball too much, because just to give you a couple stats, all the intra-Washington flights that go out of CACC account for 8% of total operations, 5% of seats and passengers. And of those 5% of seats and passengers, only 86% of them are connecting. And so even if we could, create the best aviation system within the state of Washington that maximizes 70 airports, we're kind of only scratching the surface for the ultimate challenge we're trying to solve in addressing everything that's currently going through CACC and what will continue to expand in terms of north, south, east, west, et cetera.
So Rob, let me comment, Rob, and then I'll turn it back over to you. Shane, those are great comments. So again, about the aviation system plan, the two things that are being injected into the aviation system plan, other than the normal things that would take place in an aviation system plan update, are the look at greenfield sites, so that the consultant can come in and make some recommendations back to the commission, and more of a robust environmental sustainability chapter that looks at some of these things like emerging technology to inform us, what is the truth? What is it that we can count on so that we can get better information on it? Rob.
Yes, a couple things, Shane. Great input, and I'm thinking like you, so we're aligned. A couple things, so what we're solving for pre-pandemic was an anticipated possible cap at CACC roughly in the 2027 timeframe based on the PSRC Regional Aviation Baseline Study. I suspect that has changed because of the pandemic, and we're continue to partner with CACC to understand what that looks like. But what we're solving for is an incremental increase in capacity beginning roughly 2027 and so forth. And then the second part is the objective out to 2040. And so, we want to be mindful of what the technology that we have today and the technology that may be available then could be dramatically different. But I do agree with you, the Seattle metropolitan area, the Puget Sound region, most traffic is O&D Seattle. And so it's very small. CACC many months ago shared with us kind of their connecting flight data, and it was relatively small. And so we understand exactly what you're talking about. But I think the technical expertise that we hope to get from the consultant team that we hire, we're going to drill down into some of these things. So yes, we have talked about the 6 and expanding. 1 or 2 really kind of floated to the top there, and the rest mostly GA. We continue to talk about a greenfield site. We've yet to figure out a greenfield site. So there are still a lot of things that we need to explore in order to come up with something that's actually viable. Because right now, just me as a planner, I'm not sure that we have something that's actually going to deliver.
Well, thank you both for those comments. Just one follow-up on the environmental side. I mean, I think one thing that is important as we look at either greenfield or existing sites and that 2040 timeframe, as you point out, Rob, is accessibility to the infrastructure needed for electric charging and accessibility to infrastructure needed for sustainable aviation fuel. Definitely, those are 2 critical needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are working on that. We'd love to share that with you. It's just we don't have enough time today, but our team is working heavily on that, and we're partnered with many others, Department of Commerce, NREL, NASA. We're heavily working in that space. So thank you again for that input, Shane.
Okay. So before we go to next steps, I just want to ask if there are any other thoughts that you have on how the system plan could inform the CACC deliberations. David, your turn.
Thanks, Rita. And Rudy, just to confirm, your hand's still up. Did you have another point you wanted to make?
Say that again?
Did you have something else you wanted to say? Your hand was still up.
No, I'm sorry. I forgot to put it down. Sorry about that.
No problem. Thanks. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about next steps, and then I'm going to open up to commission members so we can do kind of a round robin for any other thoughts or comments. So the first thing is I'm going to inject something in here. Our next step is actually going to be addressing the recommendations that Steve Edmiston made today. So the planning team will start working on that next week, and we will get that back out to the commission members and keep that moving. You heard about the open house. The open house is going to take place. We'll process that feedback. We'll get it back out to commission members. We'll also post that on the CACC's website. And while I'm talking about that, there's been a lot of questions today about things that are actually on that website. If you just type in Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission, it's the only thing that's going to pop up in your web browser. So it's going to take you back to the site where we're housing the information. If you see something that's not on there, contact us and we'll see what we can do about getting that to you. Second thing is we need to contract with a consultant on the aviation system plan that we just talked about. And I believe there are a couple of consultants that are interested in this, actually monitoring this call today. So it's good that they're receiving our input and yours. Then we have to work with that consultant on those two specific things that I talked about for the CACC, which is the potential siting options and the environmental sustainability opportunities that we discussed. And then finally, we're going to prep for the next meeting. The next meeting will involve a webinar that includes social equity and environmental justice so that we continue to be mindful of the guiding principles. And we're looking at doing that sometime in the week of 11 October. Terry will get out a doodle poll to everyone to see how that kind of fits with everyone's calendars, and we'll take it from there. With that, let's open it up to the floor and we'll just kind of go around the room. So no questions, comments from any commission members?
Well, I'm gonna jump in only to reiterate my thank you to the commission for letting me for both bringing in our friends from Public Health Seattle and King County, and then letting me talk about that, and then the robust discussion. And even the democratic process. I always say I love a democratic process where I lose because, you know, it's a process and we know it's a long-term process and we have things to talk about. And I just want all the commissioners to hear me say that I deeply appreciate everything that happened today. And some days you're on the top end and some days you're on the bottom end. And but it's a process that's going forward. And I think we heard an awful lot today that will inform our work going forward. And I do appreciate your comments, David, about taking some of those issues on right away. I appreciate that a lot. So thank you.
Representative Wall.
Thank you, David. I want to say thank you again. I appreciate all your work and your staff to organize these meetings. They're always well done. Appreciate the dialogue. I think it's a critical dialogue. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who's attending. You know, these are really stressful times and we're dealing with these complex issues as we're navigating a pandemic and we're all feeling a lot of stress. So I just hope everyone takes care and stays safe. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Representative Dent, sir.
Well, thank you, David. And I would like to just continue with Representative Orwell's comments. I do appreciate all the work that you and your staff do. And I'd also like to say thank you to the entire group here that's willing to serve on a volunteer basis on a commission like this. And we have a heavy lift here, and it's going to take a while to sort all of this out. So I appreciate the dialogue as well and the willingness of everyone to share. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. That's a great comment. Any others? So I'll just leave everyone with this, and I'll kind of reiterate the point that Representative Dent made. This is a kind of a long process. We've taken time to talk about a lot of issues, but I think that these need to be well thought out. They need to be well planned, and at the end of the day, we need to come up with recommendations that are executable that people are going to latch onto, and hopefully legislators can move on those recommendations. So again, we appreciate everybody's time, especially your input into the process, and we're going to keep this work moving. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.